It all begins with a late-night snack run that goes horribly wrong, as our hero wanders into a local convenience store, reaches into the fridge for a glass bottle of cola, and is suddenly interrupted by a voice asking if that's his final choice. The dark liquid trembles, and before my guy can even process the question, the shadowy cashier violently crushes him straight into the floor. The last thing he sees is a menacing smile reflected in his own terrified eye. But to understand how this dopamine addict ended up bleeding out on the tiles, we have to rewind the clock. Back then, his fingers flew across the keyboard in the dark, driven by one absolute truth. Our boy was a hardcore dopamine addict, burning through obsessions like wildfire, from idol groups to ancient history, and then throwing his body into extreme sports, martial arts, and parkour, chasing every possible thrill just to get his fix. But when the physical highs stopped hitting the same way, he turned his sights to the digital world, sinking into the glow of his monitor, even though gaming was the one vice he'd sworn he'd never touch, because every time he logged on it dragged up the crushing memory of his mother ignoring his 31 missed calls. Still, old habits die hard and the need for a distraction always won out. Desperate for a heavier hit to drown out the silence, he dives headfirst into the most punishing apocalypse simulators on the market, mastering every nightmare they can throw at him. But the only title that truly delivers the ultimate rush is a brutal little masterpiece called Apocalypse Safe Zone. The game's lore goes like this. A massive meteorite slams into Earth, triggering a devastating ice age that wipes out the vast majority of humanity in one fiery swoop, and centuries pass before the frost finally thaws and the scattered survivors crawl out of the wreckage to build fortified settlements. Or at least that's the official premise, setting the stage for a frozen wasteland divided into 9 distinct territories, ranging from the tame candy and cola zones to the completely unhinged cocaine and knife zones. When booting up, players can pick any of these starting areas except knife, and they drop into the world in the body of a 10-year-old child, starting a frantic decade-long grind to prep for the end of the world, because the exact second they hit age 20, the second apocalypse kicks off. This entire early game growth period acts as Phase 1, but as our boy knows all too well, the real bloodbath starts right after. Once that second cataclysm hits, the genre shifts to pure survival, and everyone has to defend themselves against invaders from other zones, which is where the initial difficulty setting really matters, since enduring a harsher environment naturally forges players with vastly superior stats. To top it all off, that unlisted knife zone is populated entirely by absolute psychopaths, who will gleefully grab a terrified player from a lower-tier area and slaughter them on sight. An hour ago, back in his room, our guy actually thrived on that insanity, his fingers finally freezing over the keyboard and clenching into a fist of pure relief. A system window flashed on the monitor to confirm his victory. He had just cleared every single stage of the game, including the hidden knife zone. So he quietly slipped off his headset, picked up his phone and hit upload on a strategy guide detailing exactly how to survive the nightmare. He considered writing these walkthroughs a little hobby because he wanted as many people as possible to experience the game's brutal glory, and almost immediately, his phone buzzed with a notification from a user named Home Protector, a guy who was absolutely losing his mind in the comments over a strategy that required massacring an entire town just to start the run. But before our guy could even reply, another user named Kush Potato chimed in to aggressively tell the newbie to shut up and read the damn guide. Normally he deleted toxic comments on sight, but he decided to let the banter slide for once, casually tapping out a reply to a different user to explain that unlocking the hidden zone was as simple as clearing every single other ending first, which prompted Kush Potato to immediately fire back at him too, completely baffled that anyone could actually follow such psychotic instructions. Our boy just stared at the monitor in silence, and flinched as a notification popped up to announce Kush Potato actually blocked him, a realization that made him scream in frustration at the sheer disrespect. He scrolled past the rest of the critics, ignoring Home Protector's complaints about his mass murder strategies and Safe Zone 8 treating the guide like a joke, until he spotted a genuine thank you from a user called TAEJEONGTAESEBEYONCE. The praise reassured him that his unhinged methods were actually helping people survive, so he brushed off the noise and decided it was time to move on. Back in the present, he stares at the game's title screen and officially declares his graduation from the hardcore survival nightmare. Wandering out into the cool night air to find himself completely aimless, his blood dopamine levels are already crashing back to zero, leaving him desperate to find a new thrill to chase. But as he walks, a sudden glow catches his eye. A brightly lit convenience store sitting right where there definitely wasn't one before, and he steps inside to scan the shelves of candy, cola, and cigarettes, pausing when he spots the kitchen knives and unicorn plushies that perfectly mimic the game's safe zone. He figures it must be some absurd, unofficial collaboration. so he snaps a quick picture to document the owner's hardcore fanaticism and tosses it up on the forums, where a user named Home Protector immediately DMs him for the exact address. The mysterious cashier interrupts his thoughts to ask that same fateful question, making our guy feel a little self-conscious about snapping photos. So he awkwardly averts his gaze and notices the bottle doesn't even have a barcode, just as the shadowy clerk raises a weapon behind him. The cashier praises his choice right as the blunt force smashes into his skull, and everything goes black until he abruptly crashes face first onto solid ground. He snaps his eyes open in shock to find himself strapped into a strange white uniform. But instead of panicking, a calm amusement washes over him as he realizes he's just been handed a brand new source of dopamine, while Couche Potato is right next to him, absolutely losing his mind and screaming a foul-mouthed rant about being isekai'd into the exact survival game our hero just beat. Out in the snowy village, our boy lets the kid vent for a second, then asks if he also picked the candy cola zone back at the convenience store, casually connecting the dots to see if the blonde cadet's online handle happens to be Couche Potato. The kid freezes, and our hero realizes he is stuck in this nightmare with a notoriously toxic forum hater. Couche Potato immediately gets defensive, demanding to know his companion's username in return, but Hatham just pauses, struck by the sheer irony of the situation. He remembers it clearly. Just days ago, he blocked this exact user for trashing his strategy guides. Knowing things will get incredibly awkward if he drops his real username, our hero smoothly lies and introduces himself as T. Balram. The blonde buys it immediately, asking if the infamous Home Protector leaked the store address to him too, and Hatham falsely confirms it, which sends the kid spiraling into a fresh panic over being dragged into a survival nightmare. The pieces finally click together for my guy. Home Protector must have shared the address online, and this poor hater just happened to visit the store and get swept up in the transmigration. But this realization brings a much darker implication. If the blonde cadet got dragged in, it means there could be dozens of other players spouted across the game's different zones. And once the second apocalypse hits, they might be forced to cross swords in a brutal battle royale just to survive. Our boy shakes his head to clear the terrifying thought, deciding to focus on the immediate nightmare in front of him, which is exactly when Couche Potato lights up with a sudden burst of gamer hope. The kid enthusiastically starts rambling about standard RPG mechanics like quests and skill points, before dramatically shouting commands into the snowy air, fully expecting a glowing status window to answer him. Rewind to just after they woke up, where he had already tried this exact routine in the silent courtyard. He desperately spammed every system command he could think of, only to slump to his knees in absolute defeat when the air stayed completely empty. Left with zero starter perks, he bitterly cursed the sheer unfairness of being thrown into a hardcore death game as a 10-year-old kid. Back in the present, Couche Potato awkwardly clears his throat to walk back his earlier swearing. Exhausted, he slumps against a wall and changes the subject to ask his new companion how far he got in the candy cola zone before getting isekai'd. Our hero hesitates, well aware that he is the only player in the world to ever clear the hidden knife zone, so he intentionally downplays his progress and claims he only reached the love unicorn stage. But instead of buying it, Couche Potato points an accusing finger and calls him a flat-out liar. The blonde cadet frantically argues that only Dopamine Addict and his hardcore followers ever cleared that hellscape, which makes our boy narrow his eyes at a glaring contradiction, because for a guy who supposedly hated his guts, Couche Potato seems to know an awful lot about his clear records, completely oblivious to who he's actually talking to. The kid blurts out that he's secretly a massive Dopamine Addict stan who read every single guide, pausing as the sheer embarrassment of his own confession catches up to him before his face flushes with intense fiery rage. And my guy just watches this meltdown unfold, barely hiding a psychotic little smile as the truth comes out. The blonde cadet furiously stomps his foot, ranting that he upvoted and commented on every single post only for that ungrateful prick to block him, which makes our hero realize this isn't a true hater at all, just a dedicated fanboy with some deeply bruised parasocial feelings, earning the kid a reluctant little bump in Hatham's internal evaluation. Brushing past the sheer absurdity of being isekai'd with his own biggest stan, he gets right back to business, flashing a wicked smirk as he finally declares his grand survival plan. He drops the bomb, declaring his intention to become an illegitimate child, a highly controversial psychotic strategy he personally wrote and posted on the community forums back in the real world, detailing how the Candy Cola Zone is ruled by a powerful military faction out in the snowy plains. The absolute commander of this frozen region is a terrifying figure, the ruthless warlord Hayden Goodman, and the entire route revolves around conning this dangerous boss into believing our boy is his hidden heir. Couche Potato immediately calls him insane, warning that speedrun strats won't work in reality, but our boy just calls him a chicken and turns to walk away. The blonde cadet hurries after him, defensively arguing that he's just being realistic, pointing out that if the warlord catches the lie, Hatham's head will literally roll. My guy playfully mocks the panic while the fanboy insists he's just looking out for him, though internally he admits the kid's terror is completely justified. Rewind to just moments ago, right after they were dragged into this apocalyptic nightmare, trapped in the frail bodies of 10-year-olds where death could come at any second. But as Hatham placed a hand over his own chest, he realized his heart was beating with a perfectly steady rhythm. He isn't terrified of the danger at all. In fact, our boy is riding a massive surge of euphoria. He leans fully into the madness, telling Couche Potato he doesn't care if he dies executing the con, and casually suggests that getting killed might just be the fastest way to log out and return to reality. The blonde cadet looks genuinely horrified by this suicidal logic, but as the system secretly rewards the lunacy with a dopamine up notification, Couche Potato screams in absolute frustration. The poor guy pulls his hair out, completely unable to comprehend this crazy bastard. Defeated, Couche Potato asks what he's supposed to do now, since the illegitimate child route is strictly a solo mission. Hatham just strokes his chin, already calculating the perfect use for his new companion. He asks if the guy has completed his military service yet, to which the kid indignantly replies that he just turned 20. Hatham's smile widens as he notes that it's a very good thing the kid hasn't served yet. Flashing a smug grin, he cheerfully informs the terrified fanboy that he is enlisting in the army. Couche Potato is absolutely floored by the sudden mention of a military draft, but our hero coldly reminds him of their grim reality. They're orphans. He breaks down the game's lore, explaining that this frozen hellscape is divided into 9 safe zones. The first apocalypse was triggered by a massive meteorite slamming into Earth, and from that crater, hordes of unidentified alien monsters poured out to ravage the land. To escape the slaughter, the elite unicorn zone fled straight into the sky, while the beer zone submerged itself deep into the ocean, leaving the remaining land-based territories to constantly wage bloody subjugation wars against the alien threat. Hatham points out that if they just sit around, they'll eventually be dragged into those meat grinder battles anyway. The hardcore survival system ruthlessly forces even 10-year-old players to participate in these brutal subjugation events. And since they have no home and absolutely no one to protect them, enlisting early is their only practical way to secure room, board, and the firearms training they desperately need. Couche Potato reluctantly concedes that survival has to come first, but immediately panics over one massive flaw in the plan. He doesn't speak a single word of English. Hatham pauses, suddenly realizing a crucial detail about this hardcore world. Moments ago, he had realized the game never received a Korean localization patch, a detail that became highly relevant when he handed over the enlistment application, casually telling the blonde boy the paperwork was already submitted. Since the Cola Zone was desperate enough to accept 10-year-olds, approval was basically guaranteed. Couche Potato furiously complained about the lack of a translation patch, completely unaware that our boy had filled out all the English forms for him. Back in the present, Hatham tells his panicking companion to relax, instructing him to just agree to everything the officers say. Couche Potato looks highly skeptical of this foolproof plan, but he does notice one strange detail. They are the only ones speaking Korean, yet none of the NPCs around them seem to even register the discrepancy. Our boy realizes the game's chaotic post-apocalyptic lore, which mashed surviving nationalities together, just handed them a massive linguistic loophole. Minutes ago, Hatham had immediately capitalized on this discovery, instructing the fanboy to record all important information in their native tongue. This would serve as an unbreakable secret code that the locals could never decipher. He laid out this brilliant strategy right before casually dropping the absolute bombshell that they would be separating immediately after enlisting. Couche Potato assumes our guy has real-world military experience and tries to change his mind. He begs to team up so they can clear the game faster, but Hatham flatly rejects the idea, insisting he needs to execute his solo bastard strategy. Still, the suggestion makes him pause and think, because if the two of them were dragged into this world, it's highly likely other transmigrated players are out there too. So he decides to establish a strict code of conduct for when they inevitably cross paths. He remembers it clearly. As he gave his final instructions, Hatham told Couche Potato to just memorize his orders and try not to look completely incompetent. With that, our boy casually turns his back to declare he's running solo from here on out, a move that makes the panicked blonde cadet scream after him, desperate to know what English name he actually wrote on the application form. Hatham just smirks and points out that the enlistment officer is already reading it, and right on cue, the man calls out the ridiculous alias, triggering a shriek of absolute humiliation as our hero leaves his newly dubbed companion behind to confirm the enlistment was a success. Now entirely alone in the snowy outskirts, he sets his sights on his real objective, Luna Moon's grave, where he needs to dig up a crucial item known as the Bastard's Mark. He recalls the game's lore. remembering how that item was deeply tied to the tragic backstory of Commander Hayden. Before becoming the ruthless warlord of the Cola Zone, the man was nearly killed in action, only to be miraculously pulled from the brink by a combat medic named Luna Moon. The two fell deeply in love and eventually conceived a child, but driven by sheer ambition, Hayden abandoned his new family to marry the previous commander's daughter and inherit the older man's absolute authority. He swore to his lover that he would send for her and their baby once his position was secure, a promise he could never keep because shortly after, Luna mysteriously vanished into the cold. A sudden shattering sound snaps our guy out of his thoughts, and he quickly ducks behind a snow-covered structure as a drunken slum dweller stumbles past. Realizing he can't afford to get caught out here, he holds his breath and waits for the local to wander off. He recalled from countless playthroughs how the commander spent years desperately searching for his lost love, completely unaware that she was already dead and buried right here in these very slums. When he finally stands over the snow-covered mound, our boy feels a brief pang of guilt about grave robbing, but he quickly pushes the hesitation aside, since the item buried inside is essential to his survival strategy. He drops low to brush away the frost, only to freeze in shock, because the dirt beneath his fingers is completely soft. Another player has already dug up the grave. Years ago, a devastating plague swept through the slums where Luna Moon resided, and while the healthy fled, she heroically stayed behind as a combat medic to tend to the abandoned sick. Tragically, her selfless dedication meant it wasn't long before the disease claimed her too, leaving the surviving patients to build a humble tomb to honor her sacrifice. Back in the present, the eerie silence of the snowy night is broken by the steady rhythm of our boy's shovel, and as he reflects on the medic's noble character, noting the bitter irony that she hid from Commander Hayden in a plague-ridden slum, the blade strikes something solid beneath the frost, making him realize her tragic choice actually worked out perfectly for his run. But brushing away the loose dirt, he freezes in shock, because the coffin is already open, and just as he suspected, the commander's token is completely missing from the skeleton's chest. In the original game's walkthrough, the instructions explicitly tell players to retrieve the warlord's token from this very tomb, because to be recognized as his illegitimate child, you absolutely need the dog tags he gave her. Our boy lets out a heavy sigh as he stares down at the skeleton's empty laced collar, realizing he really was one step too late and someone else already swiped the crucial quest item. But instead of panicking, a confident smirk spreads across his face. He holds a secret he deliberately kept out of his own guide. The dog tags were always just a decoy. Kneeling beside the tattered remains, he reaches right past the collar, letting his fingers brush against the cold bones to find the true prize hidden underneath, and pulls out a silver band set with a glowing blue fragment of the very meteor that destroyed the world, the Moonstone Ring. The medic's faded figure seems to stand behind him, a lingering presence that wouldn't have wanted to part with this even in death, flashing him back to moments ago when he silently apologized for disturbing her eternal rest, and for the fact that he's about to pretend to be her kid. He closes his eyes and rationalizes the deception, resolving that if he actually manages to become the commander's successor, he'll genuinely treat the man like a father. But above all else, he makes a firm vow to survive this hellish game, a thought that is immediately interrupted when a brilliant burst of blue light envelops him, triggering a system message that declares he's taken a step closer to the secrets of the apocalypse, and the blinding flash instantly sends our boy into a panic, terrified that the glowing beacon is going to expose his position to the entire base. But his terror quickly turns to absolute awe as a floating window materializes before him, granting him partial system access and offering a highly exclusive perk. He stares at the glowing text, his mind racing as he scans the available features, and notes that the global chat function is still firmly locked. Pushing his curiosity about the other menus aside, he decides to prioritize checking this mysterious perk first. The UI officially welcomes him under his legendary username, DOPAMINEADDICT, and reveals his ultimate reward for being the only player to clear every single zone, the broken ability to inherit his massive backlog of past titles. In this game, equipping a title can drastically alter NPC interactions, meaning something like the Luna Moon's friend tag will automatically grant him massive favor with anyone who loved the late medic. Knowing he has to face Commander Hayden tomorrow, Haytham strategically locks in that exact title to prepare for the meeting, and as he fiddles with the silver band, the sheer scale of his advantage hits him. While every other player is forced to start from scratch, he's already playing with a stacked deck, so he raises his hand to the snowy night sky, wondering what kind of sadistic entity dragged them into this nightmare, only to be suddenly interrupted by a strange rustle. A sudden system notification pings in the cold air, cheerfully announcing that his new title effect has just been applied to a target. Our hero stares down at his glowing ring in utter confusion, because that specific message is only supposed to trigger when an affected NPC is nearby. And right now, he is entirely alone in the snow with a literal skeleton. A memory from moments ago hits him, where he frantically shoveled dirt back over the coffin, deciding it was best not to dwell on the creepy implication of a corpse reacting to his buff. He brushes the dirt off his hands and stares into the dark, wondering if the thief who swiped the dog tags went straight to the commander's residence. He recalls how, shortly before his own arrival, the grand classical gates of the warlord's estate stood imposing under the cloudy sky, where the diligent player trying to follow the guide was unceremoniously stopped by the guards, their perfect walkthrough instantly ruined. Arriving at the gates himself, our boy confidently marches up to the sentries and declares he has crucial intel for His Excellency. But instead of turning him away, the guards exchange a shocked look, confirming that the young master of the estate predicted someone would show up. Without missing a beat, one of them waves him through the imposing doors, leaving Hatham to sweat over how quickly his solo strategy is going off the rails as he wonders who this mystery kid could be. And once escorted down the halls and into a lavish room, his eyes lock onto the figures waiting for him as an unseen voice casually welcomes him inside, revealing two older cadets, where the dark-haired teen instantly asks if he's a fellow player. A system window pings over the red-haired teen, revealing Taejong's profile and confirming he hasn't unlocked his system yet, while the dark-haired teen, Safe Zone 8, tries to reassure him by explaining that speaking Korean acts as a secret code in this world, prompting our hero to dismissively shoot back that he already knows the mechanics, and deducing they aren't immediately hostile, he demands to know why they're waiting around for other players. Safe Zone 8 smoothly deflects the question, insisting they handle introductions first, which makes Hatham pause, realizing that since these guys can't see his system info, he holds all the cards. A memory of earlier today flashes through his mind, cementing his decision to recycle the T. Bauram alias that worked so perfectly back in the snowy village. But before he can open his mouth, Safe Zone 8 steps forward to kick off the introductions, and with a confident smirk, the imposter introduces himself using Hatham's actual username, DOPAMINEADDICT. Completely taken aback, our boy asks the imposter to run that back. The guy just chuckles, assuming the dark-haired cadet is totally starstruck by his presence, and smugly boasts about his legendary fame in the gaming community, sending a crushing wave of second-hand embarrassment over Hatham as he realizes this fraud is literally imitating his old obnoxious online persona. The imposter's grand pitch plays out flawlessly as he dismisses his target as a clueless newbie. He proudly shows off the stolen dog tag, claiming it's the key to his entire strategy, acts impressed by the cadet's reckless guts for showing up empty-handed, and arrogantly offers him a spot as a lowly subordinate, right alongside the red-haired kid. Hatham silently processes this utterly absurd offer, then the pieces suddenly click into place. The game's brutal reality dictates that any player too weak to adapt to this frozen hellscape is weeded out long before they can even attempt a strategy, meaning the imposter isn't just bragging, but actively using this safe zone to gather the strongest surviving players as his personal chess pieces. The man in the white coat had laid it out perfectly. Whoever stepped up as Commander Hayden's successor was going to need a loyal army of capable helpers. So when the imposter asks if they need time to consider the offer, our hero shuts him down flat. He has absolutely zero intention of playing nice with a fraud who hijacked his hard-earned strategy. He's going to show this fake what a real masterclass looks like. Taking the hint, the imposter leaves the room to fetch the commander, and the second the heavy doors click shut, Hatham seizes the opening. He pivots straight to the red-haired cadet, demanding to know if the kid also came here to pull off the illegitimate child con, only to end up joining hands with a thief. Taejong shakes his head, explaining that he woke up right alongside the imposter from the very beginning. Hatham is mildly surprised by how cooperatively the kid is answering, but he quickly deduces that the fake started the impersonation act immediately. So he asks why the teen even bothers following a thief. The red-haired cadet lets out a gloomy sigh and admits he just didn't want to be drafted into the military again. Our guy takes note of his sturdy build and gentle personality, realizing exactly why the imposter kept him around as a convenient shield, before pressing further to ask if he resents the real dopamine addict for leaking the convenience store address. But the kid's answer catches our hero completely off guard. Taejong clenches his fist, his heart pounding with sheer excitement, and passionately declares that he is a massive fan of Dopamine Addict. He justifies his blind loyalty by claiming there is absolutely no reason not to follow the all-zone clearer in a world like this, and delivers a dead serious warning that obeying his idol is the only way to survive the apocalypse. Hatham just stares at him, quietly acknowledging the teen's well-defined, if slightly unhinged character. He asks one final question to confirm the redhead's absolute support, and when the teen resolutely doubles down on his fanatical loyalty, our boy smirks, telling the kid he passes the test. But before he can explain, the heavy doors are thrown open, and Commander Hayden Goodman strides into the room demanding to see the boy who claims to know him, triggering a sudden system chime that automatically applies Hatham's Luna Moon's friend title to the imposing warlord. And because my guy is secretly holding the Moonstone ring, A second window flashes, announcing that the title's effect has just been instantly doubled. The man with the eye patch steps in close, his single eye completely locked on our boy, and drops straight to one knee, whispering that he looks exactly like her. My guy quickly realizes the system isn't just boosting affection, it's actively projecting Luna Moon's aura right over his body. Off to the side, the imposter cadet starts sweating as he senses the heavy shift in the room. But ignoring the fake's loud interruptions, the protagonist casually digs into his pocket and pulls out the moonstone ring, presenting the glowing blue gem as his mother's final keepsake. Commander Hayden stares down at the silver band, his face totally unreadable, before turning a deadly glare toward the imposter and demanding an explanation. He reminds the terrified kid that he just claimed to be his flesh and blood, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl as he asks why his woman's ring is in someone else's hands. Safe Zone 8 completely panics, frantically spinning a new lie that our hero actually stole the jewel from him, but the warlord instantly barks at him to shut his mouth, freezing the fake dead in his tracks. The commander issues a lethal warning that he won't tolerate any more deception, while Taejong stands completely lost, muttering that the strategy guide explicitly mentioned a dog tag. A horrifying realization suddenly washes over Safe Zone 8, and he stares at our boy, desperate to know who this kid really is. Clutching his useless piece of metal, the imposter screams his demand, only for Hatham to calmly taunt him right back, just as a fatal system notification flashes before them. The window coldly announces that Safe Zone 8 has failed the strategy, and will now be eliminated. Before anyone can even react, the imposter drops dead on the floor, leaving Hatham to watch in absolute shock as the system seamlessly transfers the dead man's items straight into his own inventory. Years ago, he watched the game's brutal mechanics play out as medics hauled away the fallen. The realization hits him that the system just registered this entire stunt as a successful player kill. Hatham stares down at the fresh corpse, wondering if failing a strategy in this world actually means permanent death. He theorizes that getting flatlined here might just wake them up back in reality, but the brutal finality of the system's execution still leaves a chill in the air. Attention completely lost on Taejong, who is having a full-blown panic attack against the wall until our boy tells him to take a breath. He casually drops the bomb that the dead guy wasn't dopamine addict at all. He brings up the redhead's fanatical forum comments to point out the sheer irony of the situation, and with a triumphant smirk, finally reveals that he is the real dopamine addict. Taejong is still struggling to process the massive revelation, stammering out a question of whether our boy is seriously his gaming idol, so the dark-haired teen casually pulls up the redhead's status window to prove it, pointing out that since the kid hasn't unlocked the system yet, he wouldn't know, making Taejong's eyes go wide as his own stats reflect in the air. Our hero just smirks, internally relieved his hardcore strategy guide hasn't failed him yet, while the fanboy immediately drops to his knees to loudly apologize for his earlier disrespect, confirming just how obvious his fake tough guy act had been. The kid leans in with starry-eyed worship, but my guy quickly shushes him. He warns the redhead to keep his identity a total secret, explaining that not every player in this death game is going to be a friendly face, before ordering Taejong to strictly use his new alias, Hatham, which the ultimate fanboy eagerly accepts. He remembers it clearly. Earlier today, he secured the kid's absolute loyalty by promising to keep him alive through the zone, noting with a sly smile just how incredibly easy this fanboy was to manipulate. Back in the present, our boy considers their current location in the relatively easy Cola zone. He knows full well that scouting this brutal world in a young cadet's body comes with some severe physical limits, so he clenches his fist in his pocket to ground himself against the sheer weight of the challenges ahead. A notification pings as he glances down at the glowing moonstone ring in his palm, reminding him of a fact from his countless playthroughs. Every single zone contains a unique meteorite item. However, acquiring this specific one has triggered a brand new, unprecedented quest, the Secret of the Apocalypse. The system partially unlocked the exact second he touched the ring, which confirms that collecting the other fragments scattered across the map will eventually piece together the truth behind this world's doom. The realization hits him that his mission isn't just about preventing the apocalypse anymore, but actually solving it, and with a faint smile, my guy accepts that this reality is far more complex than the game he mastered. Shifting gears, our boy lays out their alibi for when the commander gets back, telling the redhead to play the victim and claim he was duped by Safe Zone 8, before promising an introduction to another player once the dust settles. The second he drops the name Kush Potato, Taejong instantly recalls the toxic forum hater who relentlessly flamed the strategy guide. So Hatham warns him to just play along since the fanboy still thinks he's the imposter bastard. But then the redhead brings up a completely different point, deducing that the fake bastard must have been dragged into this nightmare just like them. And when my guy asks how he could possibly know that, Taejong explains that every heavy user vanished the moment that convenience store's address leaked online. It started the day he joined the crowd of curious gamers checking out the real-world location, where he actually bumped into the guy claiming to be Bastard, and watched the man buy a packaged blade just to attempt the infamous Knife Zone guide. He felt a chill at the guy's dark determination to clear the hidden route. Our boy pieces the clues together, realizing the imposter is currently trapped in the game's most brutal starting area. He internally curses the forum user who leaked the convenience store's address, with Couche Potato's whiny defense echoing in his head, before a glaring inconsistency hits him, which prompts him to ask the redhead if he got possessed right after being attacked. He mimes the cashier bashing his own skull in with a bottle, but Taejong just looks confused and explains he was isekai'd peacefully on his way out the door, leaving the dark-haired teen completely stunned that this guy skipped the violent death tax entirely. Back then, the mysterious cashier had ruthlessly smashed a glass bottle over his skull, leaving him to wonder why he was the only one specifically targeted for a beatdown. Pushing the mystery aside for now, my guy reminds Taejong to stick to the script if interrogated, but their plotting is cut short by the heavy creak of an opening door. A young cadet steps inside with a rifle to announce that the commander is officially summoning him, and with the make-or-break moment finally here, our hero steps forward to execute his master plan. He's escorted into a grand sunlit dining room, where Commander Hayden waits at the head of a long table. Our boy takes his seat, silently marveling at just how effectively his title's illusion worked on the warlord, who reveals he sent Taejong away so they could speak privately and finally addresses the teen by his new name. The emotional conversation they had earlier today, where Hayden confessed to searching for Luna Moon for years. Haytham played his part perfectly, explaining his mother had been living in the slums before delivering the crushing blow that she was already dead and pointing the man straight to her grave. Hayden's fist clenched in grief as he completely bought the tragic lie, and when the commander vowed to make up for lost time, our hero recognized the specific line of game dialogue. He knows that phrase is the exact trigger confirming he successfully cleared the illegitimate child strategy. Right on cue, a notification pings to officially unlock the 3 reward selection. Haytham smirks internally, because this is just the first step to claiming the commander's seat, and he knows the warlord will judge his worthiness as a successor based entirely on what he asks for. Earlier during the negotiation, when the commander first asked for his wish, our boy already had his opening move perfectly mapped out. He looked the warlord dead in the eye and asked him to frequently visit his mother's grave. It was a brilliantly calculated play. The regular visits would publicly cement Hayden's favor, while forcing the man to inspect the slums would naturally skyrocket Haytham's own reputation as a benevolent successor. Hayden is deeply moved by the selfless request and solemnly promises to honor Luna Moon's resting place. So as the system confirms the updated tally for his first reward, Haytham immediately begins contemplating his next 2 moves. But before the teen can speak, the warlord silently observes his scraped hands and suddenly shifts the topic, a pivot that catches the boy completely off guard when he declares that they should eat first, gesturing to a lavish spread that is quickly brought out to the table. Our boy stares at the spread in absolute shock, stunned by the fresh bread, crisp salad, and actual meat that are practically myths in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. Though he quickly schools his expression to politely thank the commander for the generous hospitality, while over in the background, Taejong frantically bows to a very annoyed Couche Potato in a desperate bid to smooth over their earlier friction. With his squad's drama settling down, Haytham finally relaxes into his role and picks up a piece of bread to enjoy a well-earned meal. But the second he readies a bite, the food vanishes from his fingers in a sudden flash of light. He stares at his empty palm in pure disbelief as his mind races to understand what just happened. A loud clatter breaks the silence when his hand drops to the table, and Hayden leans forward with his single eye locked dead on the empty fingers, a stare that leaves the teen terrified his entire con has just been exposed. Hayden grabs the boy's arm, admitting he hasn't been paying close enough attention, and points out that the gruesome injury has completely vanished. Our hero stares at his own skin in pure disbelief. Just moments ago, Haytham's hand was a mangled, bloody mess, but he realizes the food he just ate vanished in the blink of an eye. Looking back, he knows things have been weird from the start. He remembers it clearly. Back in the town, he realized he hadn't felt a single pang of hunger since getting dragged into this world. His body is governed entirely by the game's logic, where a meal merely restores HP. He realizes this means the game's mechanics are fully applied to his physical reality. If he gets hurt, he can recover his HP in no time just by eating. Since this wasn't listed under his exclusive perks, he deduces it must be a baseline trait for all possessed players, and he makes a mental note to ominously summon a confused Taejong later to test the limits of this rapid recovery. But right now, sitting across from Hayden, our hero sweats bullets as he frantically wonders how to explain the vanishing food. He starts to stammer out an excuse, but the commander immediately cuts him off, casually mentioning that Luna Moon had healing abilities too, a bombshell that leaves Haytham in absolute shock. The warlord goes on to explain that over the years, countless kids have come to him with false claims of being his true child. He remembers how, earlier that evening, Hayden told the boy that all of those fakes were lying, and expressed his deep gratitude to Haytham for finally finding his way to him. As a heavy silence fell over the dining table, the boy looked down, mumbling to himself that something felt incredibly off. Back in the present, our boy realizes that in this game there aren't any NPCs with instant healing abilities, leading him to one jaw-dropping conclusion. Luna Moon must have been a player too, and while it's a huge relief his cover isn't blown, he now has a whole new mystery to unravel. He wonders why the Moonstone Ring, the supposed symbol of her relationship with the commander, contains the secret of the apocalypse, and what the true nature of his fake mother's powers actually was. It would be so easy to just casually ask how she used her abilities, but prying too much would instantly make the top brass suspicious. So instead, he decides to secure his position first, politely calling out to the man across the table. Looking back at earlier that day, he recalls how Hayden gave him permission to make a request, so cashing in one of his 3 system rewards, Haytham asked to host a monthly meal for kids his own age. Putting on a somber face, he claimed his heart broke for the starving children out in the cold, and leaned into a deep survivor's guilt to swear he only wanted to help them. But in reality, it's a calculated trap. Since only players operate on game logic and absorb their meals instantly, our boy can easily weed out the real people from the NPCs just by watching who leaves an empty plate. He already plans to track down Taejong and Kush Potato, knowing it'll be a breeze to keep them in line. Earning the blind loyalty of a bunch of future child soldiers makes this a total win-win, but the whole scheme hinges on Commander Hayden actually agreeing to foot the bill. It's a massive political ask that requires a lot of resources, though our hero knows it's far from an impossible demand. Sensing the warlord's hesitation over the budget, he smoothly pivots his strategy, dropping his gaze to put on a pathetic guilt trip, swearing he'd be perfectly happy just drinking water. He casually jokes about how he used to eat snow back when he was starving on the streets, then sets his teacup down with a polite request for the man to reconsider. But then our boy deploys his ultimate weapon. He looks up with innocent eyes and calls him Dad. The word strikes the warlord hard and leaves him completely speechless until a system notification pings as he instantly caves, promising to arrange the meal for early next month. Later that night, the grand hallway outside the bedroom is dead quiet, as Hayden stands by the mattress and gently tells the kid to get some sleep. Haytham politely bids him good night, but his eyes remain wide open. His mind drifts back to how the commander hesitated in the shadows just moments ago, acknowledging the kid must have had a mountain of questions about his mother's death and his father's sudden remarriage. Instead, Hayden gently patted his head, explaining the boy was still too young to understand it all. The man promised to reveal the whole truth when the time was right, asking his son to share his own secrets in return, a proposition our boy solemnly accepted. Satisfied that it was settled, Hayden nodded but paused at the door before leaving, awkwardly mumbling that the kid could call him Dad whenever he wanted. Haytham smirks in the dark, realizing just how super effective that Dad card really is. He fully intends to abuse the title whenever he needs a favor, knowing he'll need the warlord to manage his shelter down the line. Suddenly, a glowing system window pops up in the pitch-black room, announcing that the global chat feature is now active. Our boy bolts upright in bed, eyes wide as the notification confirms a second player has officially unlocked the game's interface. He immediately pulls up the prompt for the global public chat and slams the enter button, eager to test his theory that finding a meteorite item is the universal trigger. The system pings, confirming that Dopamine Addict has joined the channel. But a split second later, a second notification drops a bombshell. The imposter T. Bauram has also entered the chat. Haytham freezes in pure horror, realizing his unhinged rival just got his hands on a system unlock, which means if the imposter is still trapped in the psychotic knife zone, acquiring that specific meteorite item just triggered the catastrophic genocide route. The game's lore goes like this. The knife zone isn't just some lawless wasteland, it's a literal den of deranged psychopaths, and clearing it requires a strategy just as bloody, because to even survive Phase 1, a player has to slaughter 1,000 of its residents. It sounds impossible, but our boy knows the method. You just need to acquire the zone's meteorite item, the dagger. Once, long before any of this, it took him grueling trial and error to master its one-hit kill potential. So he is genuinely impressed. The imposter T. Bauram somehow survived that hellhole. He even managed to unlock the system, proving he's no ordinary player. Haytham ponders his next move to figure out how much progress his rival has made, and playing it cool, he casually confirms his identity in the chat. T. Bauram's response is immediate and absolutely lethal. Our boy just blinks in surprise at the unhinged death threat. He remembers how, a few hours ago, the snowy piece of the estate was broken when a subordinate barged in to wake the young master. He was summoned to meet the warden's aide, and as he stepped outside to ask for directions, his mind drifted back to the previous night when he worked tirelessly to calm the imposter down. He even shared a crucial survival tip with the guy, explaining that consuming food instantly heals wounds. But T. Bauram's grudge ran way deeper than expected. as he promised bloody murder if he ever survived the knife zone, and Hatham realized that pure spite might be the only thing keeping the guy alive in that hell. So he sent a provocative message, baiting his rival to the cola zone just to keep him motivated. Back in the present, our boy's scheming is cut short by a sudden greeting, as he turns to find a gray-haired aide waiting for him at the archery range. The man introduces himself as Mersalt Pendleton, his tone absolutely dripping with skepticism, a condescending attitude Hatham immediately recognizes, since in countless past playthroughs, this highly observant threat was usually easiest to deal with by just slipping poison into his drink. The aide demands a little courtesy, refusing to blindly accept this kid as the commander's legitimate son, but my guy knows exactly how to handle him based on the original game's lore, so this time around he decides he won't resort to a quick assassination. He knows the highly capable former child soldier is actually deeply anxious, and that beneath his freezing exterior, he harbors a desperate, secret wish to finally have a harmonious, loving family. Hatham recalls how, years ago, as a young injured soldier standing alone in the snow, Mersalt was suddenly approached by a stranger. Daphne Goodman, the former commander's daughter, kindly offered him a handkerchief for his bleeding hand, and in that single moment the aide was completely captivated. He tried to rationalize his trembling heart as mere reverence for her high status, and convinced himself that his love was a vain, impossible dream. So to cope with the unrequited feelings, he threw himself entirely into his duties. He chose a life of silent duty, standing guard at her door just to protect the place she called home, until a new figure suddenly entered the picture as a man named Hayden swept in, married Daphne, and claimed the title of commander. As his newly appointed aide, Mersalt quickly discovered the tragic truth behind closed doors. Their marriage was a complete sham, a cold arrangement born out of necessity. Unable to watch the woman he loved suffer, the aide finally snapped, confronting his commanding officer to declare that he would have stayed out of it if she were happy, but it was painfully obvious she wasn't. He boldly demanded that the sham of a marriage be annulled, but Commander Hayden remained perfectly calm in the face of the outburst, questioning why such a recognized military talent would prioritize a divorce over his own career, and then dropped a bombshell that shook the aide to his core. The commander admitted he didn't actually love Daphne and was simply waiting to reunite with his own family, meaning that once he passed his position on, she would finally be free. Armed with this exact memory, our boy prepares his trap as he looks the aide dead in the eye and hits him with the exact same question the commander asked years ago. Did he love Daphne Goodman? Mersalt staggers back, completely stunned by the impossible echo of the past, so Hatham presses his advantage, leaning fully into his role as the illegitimate bastard. He claims his own lifelong yearning for a family allows him to perfectly understand the man's heart, delivering a masterful performance designed to secure absolute loyalty. Internally, our boy wonders if he laid it on a bit too thick, but Mersalt's reaction confirms the manipulation is a total success. Right before a blue system window suddenly bursts to life in front of him, a cascade of notifications floods his vision as a wave of players enter the public chat simultaneously. Hatham stares in shock, realizing a mass system unlock just triggered across the game. And then the final notification drops. Home Protector, the shadowy mastermind behind the mass possession, has entered the chat, and he immediately recognizes Dopamine Addict. Hatham stares at the floating blue window as a mass system unlock triggers across the game, and a smirk creeps onto his face when the mastermind Home Protector brags about leaking the convenience store address. Watching these supposed veterans panic, our boy finds their absolute cluelessness hilarious, because he knows exactly how this game's lore plays out. Once the second apocalypse hits, the low difficulty shelters will be the first to fall. The brutal mechanics dictate that players must constantly migrate away from the easy camps, pushing into higher difficulty areas just to survive, but these fools are too busy roasting marshmallows to realize they're sitting ducks on a dead-end route. Deciding to gather some intel, he types a quick message to announce he's in the cola zone and ask for everyone's starting locations. The user God immediately chimes in to proudly declare their spawn point in the love zone, with TOTESPOSSIBLE right behind them in the beer zone. The chat quickly devolves into chaos, as DONTCRYITSCARDIO reps the chicken zone, and our boy hilariously admits to buying flour instead of cocaine under his junkie alias. But the mood instantly sobers when he drops the bomb that the imposter Dopamine Addict is trapped in the knife zone. Home Protector then chimes in from the cushy cigarette zone, confirming the mastermind landed in an easy tutorial area, and a sinister glint flashes in the teen's eyes as he plots to keep the guy alive just long enough for payback. As the rest of the group offers their condolences to the doomed imposter, Home Protector pivots to ask about a user named Dentist, who finally breaks his silence to express some heavy skepticism about the entire situation. The cautious user demands to know why Dopamine Addict isn't speaking for himself. Hatham notes that unlike the clueless sheep in the chat, this guy actually has his guard up. God jumps right back in to hype up Dopamine Addict as the ultimate strategy guide, mocking Dentist for being a total newbie. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, our hero ponders this pushback, knowing that before the second apocalypse, cross-zone contact is impossible, so sharing locations shouldn't matter at all. But then Dentist drops a massive bombshell, asking what a safe zone even is and proving he's completely clueless. The chat instantly erupts, the self-proclaimed veterans thrilled to pieces at the sight of a genuine newbie. Haytham pieces the clues together, remembering the dental clinic right next to the convenience store where they were all dragged into the game. So using simple process of elimination, he confidently declares in the chat that Dentist must be stranded in the Candy Zone. Years ago, as a young boy playing the original game, he confirmed that Candy was indeed the easiest starting area. With the locations sorted, our hero shifts the chat to a much more critical topic, revealing his working theory that unlocking the system requires physical contact with a specific meteorite item, which God immediately confirms by presenting a pair of meteorite earrings, while Home Protector admits to holding a meteorite pistol, and Totus Possible brings up a submarine's meteorite power source, and Don't Cry It Scardio enthusiastically adds a meteorite dumbbell to the list, before even the newbie Dentist recalls a boss-like figure forcing him to touch a strange stone. As he types under his alias to question if the system is tied to the meteorites, a glowing blue box suddenly materializes right in front of our boy, and he pieces the puzzle together. While some players actually possess the items, others merely brushed against them, proving that simple physical contact is enough to trigger the unlock. But he isn't done digging, so he types out a quick message to ask if anyone has run into other players in their starting areas. The responses flood in, confirming his suspicions. There are plenty of other survivors running around the love and chicken zones, yet only one person from each is actually sitting in this chat. Haytham instantly deduces the game's hidden rule. The system unlock is strictly limited to one person per zone, meaning there has to be a secondary hidden condition required to claim it, and he resolves to figure out exactly what that is, and why the Unicorn Zone remains completely locked out, while keeping a close eye on the group's next moves, before finally closing the window and settling back into bed, satisfied with his intel gathering. The imposter dopamine addict signs off right after him with a fake offer to help, leaving the teen to rest up and prepare for the trials ahead. A few days later, the political tension in the Cola Zone reaches a boiling point inside the executive meeting room. Lieutenant General Badham, a heavily scarred officer from the pro-Daphne faction, aggressively demands an update on the search for the so-called deserter's child, prompting the pro-Hayden loyalists to immediately fire back. Furious that Luna Moon is being slandered instead of hailed as a hero, the room quickly devolves into a vicious screaming match as the top brass hurl bitter insults across the table, until the chaos is abruptly cut short by a heavy fist slamming down onto the wood. Chief Anlon sternly reprimands the squabbling executives for daring to raise their voices in His Excellency's presence, and he coldly points out that the real issue isn't just locating the kid, but how the commander himself views the situation. Chief Anlon directly demands to know whether His Excellency considers Luna Moon a deserter or a hero, but the commander just sits there, his eye patch hiding any trace of emotion, and calmly defers the loaded question to his supposed son. The heavy double doors immediately creak open to draw every eye in the room, and as the executives turn to look, the system silently blankets them all with the Luna Moon's friend title effect right as our guy steps forward to be formally introduced as the heir. He immediately feels the crushing hostility from the pro-Daphne faction practically burning holes into him, but the teen doesn't flinch, his footsteps echoing confidently as he approaches the table to stand perfectly composed before the divided leadership of the Cola Zone, knowing exactly what he's walking into. Half this room is fiercely loyal to Daphne, while the other half consists of hardened combat veterans loyal to Hayden, meaning if he calls Luna Moon a deserter, he loses Hayden's loyalists. But if he calls her a hero, the pro-Daphne faction will completely revolt, so our boy cuts right through the trap, declaring that his mother's status is completely irrelevant, and with chilling confidence he reminds the room that the only thing that matters is his direct link to His Excellency. Enraged by the sheer arrogance, Lieutenant General Badham snaps, screaming at the teen for daring to wag his tongue when his origins are so questionable, and desperately ordering his guards to seize the brat at once. But before a single soldier can move, a gunshot rings out, leaving Badham to stare down in shock at the fatal wound blooming on his chest. Result stands there with his handgun raised, calmly stating he only stepped in to protect the young master. And as the general collapses, my guy remains completely unfazed, eerily complaining that the blood splatter just ruined his new clothes. Back in the blood-spattered meeting room, the session is abruptly suspended, but the real shockwave is our boy's chilling lack of a reaction to a man dying right in front of him. Strolling down the hall, Commander Hayden admits to Mersault that he never expected his new son to be quite so bold, and asks the aide for an honest assessment of the kid's recent education. Mersault confesses that the young master completely exceeds his expectations, as he absorbed the Goodman family history and complex military etiquette in the blink of an eye. He even paid careful attention to Daphne's backstory, but the aide notes that his astonishing concentration isn't even the most surprising part. He remembers it clearly. During a recent trip to the shooting range, a bullet punched through the dead center of a target, and Mersault could hardly believe his own eyes, as the young master's stance, breathing, and composure were as flawless as a seasoned veteran's, which made it utterly terrifying when he innocently turned around and asked if he was holding the gun right for his very first time. Of course, what the aide doesn't know is that our guy is a Korean man who already finished his mandatory military service, and he's currently equipped with the overpowered magic bullet marksman title. Back then, Mersault had walked up to the target board explaining that anyone with basic training could hit the paper, but the young master's tight center clustering proved he had a terrifying knack for it. He stressed that precision was critical for protecting the zone, because unless a soldier could perfectly snipe the core, the towering blue beast they faced simply would not die. Following that display, the aide had stood in the boy's room to declare that this exact skill made him absolutely necessary for the subjugation battle, before a sudden wave of panic hit him as he realized he was out of line lecturing the commander's son. But Haytham just turned his back to slip on his uniform jacket, his expression hidden in shadow, and coolly asked if that was so. Back in the present, Commander Hayden considers the report in silence. While out in the snowy courtyard, the base's rumor mill is already working overtime, and as Mersault walks the grounds, whispers trail behind him about his sudden insubordination, though some cadets argue that the dead executive brought it on himself by provoking the young master. But the truly chilling gossip isn't about the shooting itself. It's the story of how our boy stood there covered in blood, completely unfazed, complaining only that his clothes were ruined, leaving the recruits to debate whether his new plan to feed the child soldiers makes him a calculating manipulator or just a cold-blooded psychopath. Back in his quarters, Mersault relays the dark rumors spreading through the base. Watching the young master stare out at the falling snow, our boy glances over his shoulder with an exasperated sigh, complaining that the story makes him sound like a complete psychopath, to which the aide dryly points out that worrying about ruined clothes during a bloody assassination wasn't exactly normal behavior. But Haytham just pivots, stepping away from the window to ask a pointed question of his own. He looks the gray-haired marksman dead in the eye and accuses him of shooting that executive on purpose. The aide visibly flinches, quickly adjusting his glasses as he tries to play dumb, but my guy already has the entire conspiracy figured out. Our boy knows Hayden has been itching to execute anyone who ever insulted Luna Moon, but as the commander of the entire zone, the man is forced to maintain a strict facade of neutrality, at least until his supposed illegitimate son conveniently arrived on the scene, tipping the scales and giving him the perfect excuse to act, meaning that dead executive wasn't just a random casualty, but a calculated hit ordered by a father violently protecting his kid's honor. Pointing to his ruined shirt, Haytham lays out how Hayden definitely gave the aide a prearranged kill order for anyone who disrespected him, and casually adds that the extreme stunt neatly buried the rumors of his arrival under a mountain of fear. Mersault praises the flawless logic, but skeptically reminds the kid that he still belongs to Daphne's faction, a threat Haytham easily brushes off, fully acknowledging that his lineage makes him a prime political target. He just stares the marksman down, asserting his authority as the commander's heir and dropping the ultimate trump card, their promise to free Daphne. The aide recalls the exact moment the kid laid out the terms of their alliance, when the boy had sworn to take the commander's seat and finally set Daphne free from her gilded cage, prompting Mersault to look down at the young master and admit that those feelings were the only thing he actually trusted. Shaking off the memory, the aide clears his throat, genuinely impressed by the kid's sharp political instincts, while our boy just smirks at the rare compliment and confirms his plan to host a monthly dinner for the base's drafted orphans. When the older man asks for the specifics, the young master casually drops that he intends to prepare the meal himself, a classic psychological tactic that Mersault immediately recognizes as the oldest trick in the book to win people over. The strategy is simple. My guy knows these conscripted teens secretly resent his privileged status, so forced obedience will only get him so far, and to survive the endgame, he needs to completely brainwash them into believing he's their ultimate savior, ensuring that when the true apocalypse finally hits, they'll march into hell for him without a second thought. Unaware of the psychotic manipulation at play, the aide waits for the next step, only for Haytham to drop a wild curveball. Before they can cook, they need to go hunting. Assuming they're just heading to the kitchen, Mersault politely asks if he should help prep the ingredients, only to freeze in absolute confusion when his new boss shuts that down, with our hero flashing a confident smile as he prepares to drag the aide out into the snow to catch the main course himself. A few days ago, Mersault was absolutely miserable as he trudged through the freezing forest behind our boy. He complained bitterly that it was completely ridiculous to venture into a live monster zone with only a single rifle. but Hatham just glanced back over his shoulder and calmly asked what the big deal was about a little hunting trip. The silver-haired aide argued that he was only worried about his young master getting hurt, a rare display of concern that actually caught Hatham off guard. Of course, that touching sentiment was entirely self-serving, as Mersault knew Commander Hayden would execute him on the spot if his precious son got so much as a scratch. Maintaining his perfectly innocent facade, Hatham claimed he just wanted to prepare a sincere banquet meal from scratch, and while Mersault acknowledged the sweet sentiment, he remained entirely exasperated by the situation. He bluntly pointed out that if the kid's lack of shooting experience caused an accident, the aide would be the one taking the fall, but our hero arrogantly dismissed the concern, insisting his status as the warlord's son made hunting a breeze. He boasted that he'd taken down monsters barehanded before and told his escort to hide behind him if he was scared, even as he internally admitted that hunting alone would actually be much easier. He only dragged the aide out here to serve as a credible witness to his monster hunting skills, so when Mersault spotted an antler rabbit in the snow and suggested it as the perfect target, our boy just brushed him off, stating a mere rabbit wasn't what he was after. Without warning, he drew a knife and sociopathically sliced his own palm open. As the blood dripped into the snow, he ordered the panicking aide to keep quiet before he scared away the real catch. Suddenly, a heavy presence settled over the freezing woods, and a massive dark hoof crunched into the clearing, cutting him off. A towering hippo pig emerged from the tree line, a glowing blue gem embedded in its forehead. Mersault went into a full panic, aiming his rifle and screaming that these beasts rarely approached humans, while Hatham just stood there, chillingly calm. A system window confirmed the aide's warning, detailing that the monsters were highly cautious creatures that usually stuck to hunting small game. Mersault realized Hatham had used his own blood to lure it out, and demanded to know why he hadn't just used a rabbit for bait. Our guy coldly explained that firing a shot to catch one would have scared the beast off with the stench of gunpowder, so he ordered the aide to step back, fully aware the monster would target them simply because they were outnumbered. With the trap perfectly set, he activated his magic bullet marksman title. He knew from countless runs that the scent of fresh blood from an injured human is enough to make even the most cautious beast attack. Dropping into an aggressive stance, Hatham aimed his rifle and dared the monster to bring it on. A single deafening gunshot rang out across the snowy forest, alerting the nearby scouts, and with his massive prize secured, the teen lowered his weapon, perfectly satisfied with the kill. Sometime later, back at the base's grand outdoor facilities, the feast is finally ready. A group of young cadets arrive, looking nervous and completely out of their element, until they spot a beautifully laid-out table piled high with sizzling, freshly cooked meat. Wearing a dark blue apron, our hero cheerfully welcomes his new squad, handing out massive plates of the hippo pig pork belly, so the kids can finally drop their guard and devour the incredible meal. Meanwhile, manning the grill, Couche Potato bitterly complains that the NPCs get to actually taste the delicious food while their game bodies just absorb it, but his griping is cut short when a familiar voice notes that the two of them haven't changed a bit, and a red-haired teen suddenly bows deeply to energetically greet his new superiors, revealing himself as Taejong, who proudly drops his bizarre username, and is absolutely thrilled to finally meet the infamous forum hater in person, which sends the blonde teen into an instant rage as he demands to know why Hatham didn't force this guy to enlist in the brutal academy like he did. But Hatham calmly shuts him down, noting the older teen's past in camo as he explains that Taejong already completed his mandatory military service back in the real world. Taejong cheerfully assumes our boy must know how to handle a gun since he is a fellow gamer, completely oblivious to the fact that the boss is secretly being hard-parried by a system title, causing Hatham to instantly snap and scold the idiot for carelessly shouting their biggest secret where anyone could hear. After shutting him down, the young mastermind calls for a progress report on their infiltration, prompting Taejong to proudly reveal he is working as a servant right inside the commander's mansion to easily gather intel from the senior staff. When asked if he has actually overheard anything important, the redhead confidently nods and drops a completely useless piece of gossip about Lieutenant General Radu having an affair, earning deadpan stares from the other two. Pivoting away from that train wreck, Hatham turns to Couche Potato to ask if he has found out anything actually relevant to the upcoming subjugation battle, and the blonde teen reveals a terrifying rumor that the young cadets might actually be drafted for the next major offensive. Analyzing the weather, my guy knows the battle usually hits when the frost melts, and since the snow was piled high during his hunting trip, they still have a little time to prepare. So he asks the fanboy for his actual report, but Couche Potato interrupts to show him something else, pulling out a mysterious ring on a string and prompting Taejong to innocently ask if he got it as a gift. But looking at the item, Hatham realizes the terrifying reality of what this means. It confirms the existence of other players scattered across the different zones. Couche Potato wonders aloud where the legendary dopamine addict ended up, causing Taejong to internally panic since he still thinks Hatham is the real deal. Our boy just listens, secretly plotting to put these two firmly in his debt before he officially drops his true identity, while the blonde teen grumbles that the famous gamer probably wouldn't share his survival secrets anyway. Taejong then asks if they are the only possessed players in the Cola Zone, and they all agree that since they haven't spotted anyone else acting strange, they must be alone here. However, Hatham thoughtfully looks away, hesitating for a second before he decides to share a massive theory. He reveals his suspicion that the legendary hero, Luna Moon, might have actually been a player herself. Glancing at Couche Potato's meteorite ring, Hatham notes that it didn't trigger any kind of magical awakening for the blonde teen, before dropping the absolute bombshell that he has already unlocked his own game system by touching a specific item. Seeing their completely shocked reactions, he easily deduces a hidden rule. Only one person per zone can actually unlock it. Couche Potato immediately spirals into a panic, screaming about what useless extras like him are supposed to do now. Unfazed, Hatham calmly downplays the whole thing, noting that the system is mostly just basic menus and the only truly important tool is the global chat window. But then our hero's casual smirk vanishes, replaced by a dead serious stare as he reveals the true nightmare of their situation. There are currently exactly 8 people sitting in that chat room. Couche Potato is still reeling from the chat room reveal, but he is absolutely floored by our boy's next theory, that the legendary Luna Moon might have actually been a player. The dark-haired teen admits it is just a hunch, but points out her distinctly Asian heritage, a rarity in this world that strongly hints at her true origins. Years ago, he remembers how the older staff constantly remarked on his own foreign appearance. Back in the present, he adds that she was known as the hero of the subjugation battle, a detail that makes Couche Potato realize it sounds suspiciously like an exclusive player title rather than something a generic NPC would have. But my guy says the most decisive clue is something else entirely. Rewind to a few days ago, when Commander Hayden had explicitly confirmed that Luna Moon possessed the exact same instant healing abilities that they do. With a confident grin, our hero declares that this world has a hidden storyline they know nothing about, transforming their survival game into a thrilling hardcore raid. His psychotic excitement completely creeps out Taejong and Couche Potato, who huddle together in fear, but he just ignores them and digs into his pockets, well aware that the final boss of this hidden raid won't be a pushover, pulling out the moonstone ring he looted from Luna Moon's skeleton. In the original game, he knows this accessory was just an ordinary item, but after seeing the system confirm his title's effect, our boy realizes this game world is packed with brand new secrets. He remembers how he once felt a similar comforting warmth from a completely different artifact, but the second he set it down, the metal would turn ice cold, almost as if it were mourning the separation. Since his exclusive title specifically targets NPCs, the teen deduces that the jewelry itself must contain a digital character's trapped ego. He stares at the band, wondering whose consciousness could possibly be locked inside to make him feel so nostalgic. Rewind to a few days ago, when the trio debated these exact changing rules, and Couche Potato completely panicked over whether all their hardcore strategies were now useless. Hatham firmly shuts that fear down, reminding his squad that the core rule remains absolute. Players who fail the raid will die. Taejong then points out the glaring anomaly. If Luna Moon's settings were changed, it makes no sense for her to be the only one. Long before any of this, Taejong remembers reaching for a soda in the real world, a mundane life he left behind. He brings up the chilling possibility that someone else might have possessed a character long before they ever arrived, leaving Couche Potato feeling completely crushed by the sheer weight of these new anomalies. But our hero just glares at his simple-minded teammate, frustrated by his inability to see the bigger picture. Rewind to a few days ago in the dorms, where Hatham had told them their immediate goal was participating in the upcoming subjugation battle, since surviving the first raid rewarded a special title. When Taejong eagerly volunteered to join the front lines, the dark-haired teen secretly decided to bench him. He knew that if the mission went south and both he and Couche Potato failed, they needed at least one player left behind to clean up the mess, not that he had any intention of going down easily. To prepare for the ordeal, he called the two of them to his room for a secret training session. He laid out a single fork and a tray of cookies, leaving the boys completely confused. Hatham announced they were going to practice eating, explaining his theory that actively focusing on the act speeds up their game body's recovery rate, though Couche Potato immediately questioned why they needed utensils for baked goods. The question struck a nerve, and a dark aura flared up around our guy, as he calmly lifted his hand to reveal a fresh gash and explained that they needed a real injury to test the recovery speed. Couche Potato and Taejong recoiled in horror at the realization that their leader was a complete sociopath who had just casually stabbed himself. Ignoring their disgust, the teen simply closed his eyes and took a bite of the cookie, and instantly, the torn flesh glowed and sealed itself shut to prove his point. He told them they needed to level up their basic healing before the subjugation battle, and sadistically ordered his squad to grab their forks and start stabbing themselves. Couche Potato immediately shot out of his chair and refused, boasting that he had already mastered his recovery, and reached his hand out over the table to demonstrate. Couche Potato shows off his unique trick, absorbing the food's energy straight through his fingertips without taking a single bite, and Taejong stares in absolute amazement as he asks how the healer figured out such a convenient hack. Long before any of this, Couche Potato remembers how his real body was so frail he spent more days hooked up to an IV drip than actually eating meals, a miserable experience of being fed through a needle that he endured for years. Back in the room, he explains that recalling that sensation helped him conceptualize the skill, boasting that he can heal a broken arm just by touching a snack. Our guy genuinely praises the ability, a compliment that catches the blonde teen off guard, as Hatham points out that if the squad ever gets injured, Couche Potato will recover first, and can act as their dedicated feeder. The fanboy's face instantly drops into shadow as he realizes he's just been drafted into being the team's personal heel slave, but the dark-haired teen just takes a bite of a cookie and officially appoints him to the role. Later that night, the base is completely quiet. Our hero sits alone with his tray of harvested treats, scheming about what kind of hellish training to put Taejong through next, until a sudden system chime interrupts his plotting. A flood of friend requests suddenly pops up on his screen, pinging him with invites from users like Home Protector, God, Don't Cry at Scardio, and Dentist. Recalling that adding a friend opens up a private DM, he clicks accept on the earliest request, only for Home Protector to instantly fire off a message whining about the wait. My guy coldly demands to get straight to business, and completely brushes off the user's frantic apologies for leaking the convenience store address that got them isekai'd in the first place. Desperate to stay on his good side, Home Protector quickly pivots to ask if he's heading to the Unicorn Zone later. Before Hatham can even type a reply, a system window pops up with a direct item trade for 12 cigarettes. Thrilled to discover that the feature bypasses zone barriers for loot, he happily accepts the bribe straight into his inventory. The shameless chat user admits he just wants to ride his coattails, tossing over the smokes as a down payment to secure a spot in his future shelter. Hatham realizes that while building a network of pawns inside the academy is crucial, securing external sponsors through the global chat is just as vital, and he has to respect the hustle, smiling to himself as he decides to study the trade feature a bit more before turning in for the night. But just as he settles in, another system chime rings out in the dark room. His eyes go wide in genuine shock as he reads the name on the new friend request, the imposter T. Bowram. The very same psycho who just triggered the catastrophic genocide route is suddenly knocking on his digital door, and he wants to be friends. Curious, our boy accepts the request, instantly receiving a private message. On the other end, a battered and bloody T. Bowram glares at his screen, desperate to kill Dopamine Addict before he succumbs to his wounds. He remembers his life before the game. He was just a retired national athlete looking for a new hobby. So when a junior colleague suggested a trendy username for a fresh survival run, he punched it in, officially birthing the legend of T. Bowram. His everyday routine had become completely dull after stepping down, but this brutal digital nightmare felt utterly alive. He poured hours into the monitor, analyzing the sudden difficulty spikes and zone mechanics, and while the constant game over screens were infuriatingly similar to the struggles of his own life, pure spite drove him to keep playing. He successfully cleared the early zones with a twisted sense of satisfaction, until he hit a massive wall, the game's adaptive AI learning system. The late-game zones were a completely different nightmare, entirely dominated by an AI that had perfectly copied the top player's psychotic playstyle. Time and time again, T. Bowram found his avatar hopelessly crushed into the dirt by the AI clone of Dopamine Addict. Realizing with mounting dread that the entire game's meta had been hijacked by this one player's strategies, burning with frustration, the retired athlete vowed to strike back at the bastard who ruined his hardcore experience, which was exactly when a new strategy post for the hidden knife zone dropped on the forums, authored by none other than his nemesis. He stared at his screen in absolute shock that the lunatic had already cleared such a notoriously brutal area, but refusing to be outdone, he swallowed his pride and realized he had to move faster than everyone else. He theorized that if he became the second person to clear the knife zone, the matchmaking system would pit his own AI directly against Dopamine Addicts. So he stayed up all night meticulously grinding through the grueling guide. But just as he finally unlocked the area, his rival vanished from the internet entirely, leaving behind nothing but the address of a mysterious convenience store, and completely ignoring the ominous rumors of missing people. T. Bowram decided to investigate it himself. Arriving at the glass doors, T. Bowram was suddenly approached by a familiar face, Taejong, who immediately recognized the retired athlete in the flesh. They exchanged a quick back and forth, confirming they were both chasing the same survival game, though the athlete mentally wrote the kid off as just another one of Dopamine Addict's brainwashed fanboys. Bracing for whatever psychotic trap the guide warned about, he grabbed a combat knife from the aisle and slapped it on the counter, only for the mysterious cashier, his face buried under a cap and mask, to question the lethal purchase with a highly suspicious tone. Strangely, the creepy clerk refused to take his money and offered the weapon for free, claiming he was the very first customer to pick it. T. Balram turned away to piece together the rumors of the missing people, finding nothing unusual about the store besides its weird part-timer, until the masked cashier muttered a sudden hostile insult from the shadows, making his footsteps halt abruptly, and he whipped back around, his eyes blowing wide in absolute shock before the memory fades, leaving that terrifying cut to black as his final glimpse of the real world. He remembers it clearly. When he opened his eyes again, he was trapped in the body of a 10-year-old child, dropped straight into the nightmare of the knife zone and surrounded by cannibalistic murderers. Recalling Dopamine Addict's guide, he knew his only shot at survival was to play dead and ambush the area's boss. So he disguised himself among the bloody corpses and executed the strategy to absolute perfection. He successfully snatched the meteorite knife, triggering the genocide route. But the cost was steep. He sustained severe injuries in the process. Slumped in a dark alleyway, he realized he couldn't even use the game's healing mechanic because the only food available was human flesh. Refusing to resort to cannibalism, he messaged Dopamine Addict and accepted his inevitable death. Back in the present, T. Balram sits in the ruins, frustrated that his rival is ignoring his final words, and despair fully sets in as his vision begins to blur. But suddenly, a system notification pings. Dopamine Addict has sent a trade request offering 15 cookies. Our boy mocks the dying man's refusal to enjoy the game, provoking a furious death threat in response. The dying athlete fires back one last message, claiming that even Dopamine Addict wouldn't be able to survive the zone's brutal clear conditions before the second apocalypse hits. Haytham remembers it clearly. Back in his early days here, he sat in a dingy room and realized his psychotic old speedrun strategy was physically impossible for a child's body, meaning he would need a capable pawn to clear the area for him. And he also recalls the real world where he used to laugh out loud at the sheer spite in T. Balram's comments. Sitting at his desk, Haytham is perfectly fine with the hostility, and he hopes the burning anger fuels his rival's will to live. Because he didn't hand over those cookies out of the goodness of his heart, he needs the athlete to survive and bring him the knife zone's meteorite dagger. Meanwhile, far away in the serene, moonlit mountains of the Love Zone, 3 red-robed followers kneel in reverence before a glowing woman in a pristine white dress, as a young acolyte urgently begs their leader for a divine message. The woman calmly replies that God delivered a revelation, but it was completely ignored. She turns to reveal herself as the cult leader Manson and declares that Lord Dopamine Addict will not be coming to help them, her eyes narrowing with a dark, calculating agenda. A system window floats in the air, confirming that our boy still hasn't accepted her friend request. A silence that leaves her followers terrified they've been abandoned. But Manson just smiles, fully aware that the legendary gamer is just as reliant on them as they are on him, since if he had spawned in his home base, the Unicorn Zone, he'd be completely untouchable. But right now he's stranded and vulnerable in the Cola Zone. Here in the Love Zone, she is in her absolute element, because long before she was dragged into this nightmare, she made her living as a fake shaman, so she knows exactly how to manipulate people's hearts, which just so happens to be the essential clear condition for this very territory. She remembers the early days of the game, where she used her lucky system unlock to pass off basic notification windows as divine prophecies to the panicked players, stepping right up as their ultimate savior by claiming to be the sole conduit for the voice of God, and commanding her new flock to spread a rumor that a divine messenger would descend in exactly 10 years to punish the non-believers. She knows that anyone holding a meteorite item is going to be a massive target in the brutal war to come. She recalls how she ruthlessly indoctrinated the zone's youth with the promise of the second apocalypse to forge an army of unbreakable zealots, preparing to rule the Love Zone with a sinister promise that this playthrough wouldn't be so easy for our hero. Back at the training grounds, Haytham is putting Taejong through the ringer, and as they run, he asks if the red-haired cadet was an athlete before all this. Taejong catches a tossed water bottle and confirms he was, but admits he's completely blown away by his superior's physical prowess. He figures the guy must have been some kind of special forces operator before transmigrating, but our hero bluntly admits he was a total couch potato. This somehow just makes the kid worship him more, convinced his big bro is a natural-born genius, which Haytham immediately rewards by ruthlessly doubling his laps. Because the harsh truth is that while the game system grants him an arsenal of overpowered titles, none of them actually buff his physical stats, leaving him sweating through his own laps, trapped in the weak body of a 10-year-old who gets winded after a light jog. He pulls up his status window, reviewing the ridiculous laundry list of titles he inherited as an all-zone clearer. A memory hits him of the simulation range, where none of those perks explained how he was able to perfectly wipe out Platin's elite squad, or how he managed to snipe a monster with veteran-level accuracy. The secret lies in one specific title, Magic Bullet Marksman. It's an overpowered perk that guarantees his first 6 shots will never miss their mark, but in this brutal survival game, every cheat code comes with a terrifying catch. The 7th bullet carries a curse that unconditionally strikes the person most precious to the user. Doing the math on his previous shots, he knows he fired 3 during the simulation and 1 at the hippo pig, leaving him with only 2 safe rounds, and as he jogs across the grounds, the terrifying reality sets in. If he pulls the trigger that 7th time, the system will automatically target Commander Hayden, the man who currently holds the highest affinity with him. Frustrated, he curses Mersault for making him waste those bullets during their hunting trip and decides he has to avoid firearms entirely, until his internal panic is abruptly interrupted by Taejong waving a hand in his face. Hatham awkwardly pretends he was listening to the red-haired cadet's rambling, and nods along as the former athlete eagerly suggests they switch to interval training to maximize their stamina recovery. Taejong even offers to manage his diet, though he admits finding decent meals in this military camp is tough, a casual complaint that triggers an instant lightbulb moment for our hero. A flashback hits him of a few days ago, when our boy realized his unique game body mechanic meant he could instantly absorb food to heal wounds and restore stamina. He had tracked Mersault down in the library to ask about the base's supply of combat rations, and played the weird request off as simple curiosity born from his confinement. A cutaway shows his secret meal experiments had already proven that highly compressed foods like jerky restored far more energy than a standard plate of meat. Back in the memory, that was why he specifically asked the silver-haired aide for the most calorie-dense rations available, even if they were completely expired. Another cutaway reveals he just wanted to test the absolute limits of his absorption ability, to see exactly what his glitched system would accept. Returning to the library memory, Mersault had just sighed at the bizarre demand, but that little conversation had set the wheels in motion. Back in the present, a gray-haired scientist approaches our hero to discuss his strange inquiry, and he readily agrees to follow her. She leads him straight to the Zone Security Research Lab, the facility responsible for developing all non-lethal military supplies, where she presents a tray of dried monster meat and offers him a taste of their standard combat rations. He inspects the tough, unappetizing jerky, noting how surprisingly bulky it is, and finally takes a hesitant bite. Chewing with a deadpan expression, Hatham bluntly states that it tastes like a combat boot that hasn't been washed in years, which earns him a highly suspicious look from Mersault, forcing the boy to quickly deny ever eating footwear, while internally sweating over quoting a line straight from the game's script. But before he can explain further, the lab doors fly open, and the lab director bursts in, looking like he's just found a savior, immediately launching into a passionate, unhinged rant about the historical importance of food supplies and the looming threat of starvation. And as he dramatically throws his papers into the air, Mersault leans in to whisper that elders who survived the apocalypse tend to be a little eccentric about their rations. A flashback hits him of a few days ago, when our boy was already laying the groundwork, crouching down to help the eccentric director gather his scattered documents. He put on his best innocent child act, claiming his only dream was a world where no one ever had to starve again. The old man was deeply moved, fully believing the kid's recent stunt of feeding the child soldiers was born from pure, selfless nobility, which Hatham immediately capitalized on, holding up a piece of standard jerky to request the development of smaller, lighter combat rations so his friends wouldn't go hungry. The lab already had the freeze-drying technology, but no one had ever cared enough to ask for better food, so, fired up by the fake righteous cause, the director eagerly accepted the challenge. My guy just smiled, successfully securing his ultimate stamina recovery items, but Mersault wasn't fooled for a second, casually questioning the kid's true motives the moment they stepped outside. Mersault asks if the boy has been keeping tabs on the child soldiers through the kids he called to his room, realizing that beneath that innocent facade our hero is already planting watchers all over the base. The silver-haired aide admits he usually views everyone besides the commander as complete idiots, but looking at this terrifying 10-year-old, he genuinely believes the kid will one day become his superior. My guy just gives him a blank, unreadable stare, prompting Mersault to scoff and assume the boy is just trying to align himself with the winning faction. Before the tension can escalate, a guard suddenly interrupts to announce a mandatory inspection, explaining that leaving the research district requires a strict body search to ensure no classified materials slip out. A flashback hits him of a few days ago, when our boy dealt with this exact same checkpoint routine. He had been inspected by a young guard with red eyes, the son of Lieutenant General Batum, the very executive Mersault had recently assassinated. The aide had formally apologized to the grieving teen for his father's death, which the son quietly accepted before clearing them to pass, and as they walked away, Mersault had calmly explained the boy's tragic background. Mersault notes that Badam had abandoned the child the moment he was born, yet the boy still wept for the monster. He casually mentions that it's a massive relief the kid didn't hold a grudge, because Commander Hayden had secretly ordered the aide to execute Batam's son on the spot if he showed even a hint of hostility toward our boy. The realization of just how ruthlessly Hayden is protecting him clicks into place, and Haytham notes that the rest of the executives have been actively dodging him ever since the assassination. A vision shows the shadowy top brass cowering in their offices, terrified of the commander's new favorite son, but if they're going to keep hiding and plotting in the dark, Haytham smiles, deciding it's time to take the initiative and pay them a little home visit. Meanwhile, in the officer conference room, the pro-Daphne faction holds a tense meeting. They debate the dead monster our boy recently dragged into camp, with some officers convinced the warlord orchestrated the entire stunt just to build his son's reputation, especially since the silver-haired warden shadows the kid's every move. But Chief Anlon sits in grim silence, listening to reports of the brat's chilling lack of reaction to an executive being gunned down right in front of him, before finally breaking his silence to declare the boy a direct threat to Lady Daphne. When a subordinate asks if the white-haired woman has shared her thoughts on the matter, the gray-bearded executive taps his desk and assumes she is carefully deciding her next move. He remembers it clearly. The kid had actively cemented his own standing by handing out meat to the child soldiers. Back in the present, Anlon questions if this is really just the innocent behavior of a child desperate for validation, or if the little monster is plotting something far more ambitious, but they fail to reach a consensus on how to handle him. Meanwhile, the pro-Hayden faction's secret meeting is crashed by a rival officer who presses the nervous executives on why they're being so quiet. The bearded executive covers for them, claiming they were just marveling at young Haytham's hunting skills, which prompts the intruder to pull up a chair and play along. He casually suggests bringing the boy along on the upcoming subjugation battle to show him the ropes, but the older man sees right through the bait, refusing to let them put a child on the front lines for a political scheme, and the room erupts into a bitter screaming match between the factions. Earlier that day, a panicked cadet burst into the room with an emergency report, dropping the bombshell that our hero had just scaled the wall to Daphne's quarters. In a brief memory, our boy had been sitting alone in his room trying to figure out how to drag the divided officers into a single meeting. The answer was obvious. Just poke the one person both sides were fiercely sworn to protect. Recalling the infiltration, he scaled the stone wall of Daphne's estate and dropped into the courtyard, nearly giving a maid a heart attack in the process, and since his formal meeting requests had been ignored, he figured a little breaking and entering was perfectly justified, casually strolling through the massive grand hall, until a sharp voice cut through the chaos, revealing Lady Daphne Goodman herself, glaring down at the intruder from the top of an elegant staircase as the memory fades. A system window suddenly pings over the woman's head, dropping the absolute bombshell that she is a fellow player. The revelation leaves our hero completely stunned, shattering his assumption that this elegant noble was just another NPC. He stares at her highly embarrassing username and an impossible merry bad ending clear route, completely baffled by a game mode he has never heard of in his life. Our boy quickly deduces that since she isn't reacting to his own stats, she must be stuck on an older version of the system. So when Daphne demands to know why he's staring at her so intensely, he offers a quick apology before smoothly lying that it's a habit he inherited from his mother, Luna Moon, a name that visibly shocks the elegant noble. He then claims he came to deliver Luna's final words and respectfully asks for a private audience, a request that immediately sends her protective maids into a rage as they demand the intruder leave the premises at once. In a quick memory of the start of their private audience, the woman formally dismissed her attendants to speak with the boy alone, allowing the grand room to empty out and leave the two of them in an expectant silence. He watched calmly as she reached for a green teapot and poured him a cup before she seriously inquired about the message Luna Moon supposedly left for her, ending the recollection. Sitting across from the white-haired noble, our boy notices something off. Her entire political faction openly despises Luna Moon, yet Daphne doesn't show a single ounce of hostility, instead keeping her hands tightly clasped in her lap as she radiates a heavy nervous guilt, making the logic click into place for him. Since Commander Hayden's true love was the heroic medic, and the bride who actually ended up marrying the warlord probably never felt at ease. Deciding to push his luck, Haytham deliberately brings up his mother, and as Daphne flinches, he smoothly lies that Luna left behind a message of forgiveness just to see what unexpected intel shakes loose. She immediately drops her gaze and clenches her fists, confessing that there is no way she would be forgiven so easily. But the real bombshell drops when she admits she stole the man Luna loved just to clear her specific route. a bizarre phrase that completely derails our hero's train of thought. The puzzle pieces violently snap together as the massive realization hits him. If Daphne is a transmigrator who personally knew his supposed mother, then the legendary Luna Moon wasn't just an NPC, but a fellow player from an entirely different version of the game. To pry the rest of the story out of her, our boy decides to play dirty, claiming his mother left behind a secret message to force her cooperation, and shamelessly dropping the ultimate nuke by reciting her highly embarrassing username out loud. The woman's face instantly detonates into a furious blush, and she covers her eyes in humiliation to beg for mercy, while my guy just deadpans, silently judging her middle school level cringe. She stares down at her teacup, hesitating for a long moment before finally dropping the massive revelation that she and Luna aren't from this world at all. They just woke up one day possessing characters inside a video game. She braces for his disbelief, but our hero just practices his fake sipping technique, completely unfazed since he is in the exact same boat. As a system window flashes a sprawling list of franchise titles, his analytical mind races to the real question: which specific version of the game are they actually trapped in? The Safe Zone franchise has a massive history spanning from retro pixel games to modern console releases, and since our guy played the absolute latest version, he realizes other players might have been pulled from entirely different eras of the series. He asks which one she was playing, but she immediately blushes and hesitates, making him wonder why a hardcore survival game would be so embarrassing to talk about. To force her hand, he drops a fake cough and aggressively guilt-trips her by bringing up his tragic days in the slums and his dead mother's dying wish, which is more than enough pressure to make the woman stammer out a single letter. She finally blurts out that she transmigrated from a DILF dating sim, leaving Hatham completely blue-screened by the sheer absurdity of the bombshell, while across the base, a horrified Mersault just gets word that the boy has broken into Daphne's private quarters. Seeing our boy's utter confusion, Daphne decides to lay everything out from the very beginning. She reveals that the brutal reality they're currently surviving in is actually based on a game she used to play, a bizarre title called Middle-Aged Handsome Men Dating Sim, a romance visual novel set in this exact apocalyptic military base, where Commander Hayden was a main capture target. Back then, in her original life, she played the game obsessively every single day, because she fell deeply in love with one specific character, and even after transmigrating directly into the game's world, she found that he was still just an uncapturable extra. Despite that, her feelings remained, and she desperately tried to get close to him. She tried to get close to him, nervously offering a handkerchief when he returned covered in dirt, only for the young man to politely refuse, not wanting to ruin the pristine fabric. Back in the present, our boy connects the dots instantly, and Daphne confirms his suspicion with a soft smile. The uncapturable extra she fell so hard for was none other than Mersault. This immediately prompts the obvious question from our hero: if she loved the aide, why did she marry the commander? Her expression falls as she looks away, quietly admitting that she had absolutely no choice. Years ago, when she first transmigrated into this world, a glowing system window slapped her with a mandatory quest to marry an NPC within 1 year or face instant death. The only available capture targets on the entire base were the previous commander and Hayden, and since she had woken up in the body of the previous commander's daughter, Hayden was literally her only option to survive. Our boy sits back to process the sheer absurdity of the situation, realizing her entire existence here has been dictated by a twisted dating sim mechanic. She was dropped into a completely different genre, yet the characters and background perfectly mirror his own hardcore survival nightmare. And while he always assumed he just fell into a digital world, it might be the exact opposite, with someone modeling these games after an actual, living reality. It's just a working theory, but one thing is absolutely certain: the entity responsible for dragging them into these deadly scenarios is a sadistic, psychopathic viewer, and he silently vows that if he ever meets the bastard pulling the strings, he'll make them pay. Daphne interrupts his thoughts, confessing that back then, even though she survived, she deeply regretted her choices, as her selfish greed to stay by Mersault's side ended up ruining every relationship she had, pushing her until she eventually broke down and begged Luna Moon to help her avoid the marriage at any cost, only for the medic to vanish without a trace the very next day. She explains that left all alone in the mansion, she was ultimately forced to go through with the wedding, and because of that crushing guilt, she admits she simply can't believe the medic would ever forgive her. Hatham silently agrees, knowing he wouldn't have let it slide easily either, but as he takes a sip of his tea, his veteran gamer intuition tells him something is off, because back then, instead of staying to marry Hayden herself, the medic had simply walked away into the freezing snow. Our boy narrows his eyes as a much darker possibility crosses his mind, realizing that since Daphne has survived in this cutthroat military organization for a decade, she could easily be lying right now, or worse, she manipulated the entire faction into driving her rival away. But as he sets his cup down, he decides the truth doesn't actually matter, since whatever sins she committed in the past are completely irrelevant to his current goal. The only thing that matters is that her absurd, unrequited love for the bespectacled aide is entirely genuine, and he figures that as long as he keeps Mersault on a tight leash, this woman will never dare to cross him. With his leverage fully secured, Haytham addresses her directly, casually offering to help her divorce his father, a sudden proposition that leaves Daphne completely blindsided. Our boy just smirks and sets the hook, making it clear he'll only pull this off if she agrees to help him in return, and desperate for a way out of her forced marriage, she immediately asks what she needs to do. Moments later, the young master strolls down the corridor with his plan fully formed. With Daphne on his side, securing the split will be a breeze, especially since he still has one of his 3 rewards left from Hayden to cash in, and a dark chuckle escapes him as he pictures the absolute frenzy this will cause among the pro-Daphne faction. Back in the commander's office, Hayden had made an exact promise that the warlord would reveal everything if the boy took his side. Since the warlord might already suspect Luna Moon was actually a player, our boy knows he has to tread carefully, resolving to play the role of the perfect innocent son just a little longer until he has this entire base in the palm of his hand. But before he can even make it down the hall, a panicked Mersault bursts through the double doors, making the kid blink in genuine confusion as the silver-haired aide stammers out a bewildered question, completely failing to process the sheer chaos his young master just cooked up. They don't even get a chance to sort it out before an enraged Chief Anlon storms onto the scene, furiously accusing the kid of disrespecting Lady Daphne by breaking into her quarters and kicking out all her maids. The bearded general demands to know what kind of earth-shattering business could possibly justify such a massive stunt, but Haytham just hits him with a perfectly calm, smug little smile, more than ready to drop the bomb. Our boy loudly announces to the entire corridor that he just swore on his mother's name to get His Excellency and Lady Daphne a divorce, a bombshell that sends an immediate shockwave of panicked murmurs rippling through the gathered executives. Anlon absolutely loses his mind, screaming at the kid and demanding to know what the commander will do when he finds out about this treasonous stunt. But right on cue, the warlord himself steps out of the shadows, his single eye glaring as he asks if there's something he shouldn't know about. Commander Hayden stares down our boy in the hallway, but Haytham plays it completely cool, smoothly claiming that his unannounced visit to Daphne was harmless and that she already forgave him. But the warlord isn't having it, warning the kid that a simple apology doesn't erase the crime. A few weeks ago, the man had reached out and laid down the absolute law of the estate. Hayden had clenched his fist and made it crystal clear that any action taken without his explicit permission was a punishable offense. As Mersault had watched the reprimand unfold in silence, our hero had simply bowed and spotted the massive loophole. As long as he asked first, he could cause all the trouble he wanted. Back in the present, Haytham respectfully addresses him as his father, and the warlord's stern demeanor instantly melts into a gentle smile as he warmly dismisses his son. As they walk through the sunlit corridors of the estate, Mersault immediately scolds the boy for his reckless stunt, telling him to be grateful he got off so easily. But my guy just casually changes the subject, flashing a smug grin as he reveals that Daphne wants a divorce. The aide freezes in absolute shock, so our hero adds that he's fully backing her play, and then steps in close to deliver the ultimate bait. She's already on the hunt for a remarriage partner. Mersault's eye widens as the kid casually mentions she asked him to scout out candidates, and while our hero notes the painfully obvious unacknowledged tension between the aide and the commander's wife, the older man suddenly cuts off his internal scheming, desperate to know exactly what he needs to do to get on that shortlist. This guy just gives him a deadpan stare, advising his new pawn to start by treating him right and to keep his expression in check as they head down the hall. With the aide's absolute loyalty secured, the rumors of his stunt in Daphne's quarters quickly fade away just as the winter snow finally begins to melt. Earlier, at the onset of the subjugation battle, when the entire base had been scrambling to prepare for the upcoming war, our boy had marched right into Commander Hayden's office, fully expecting to join the front lines only to get hit with a massive reality check. The warlord had flat out rejected him, and the kid could only stand there internally screaming. He had this whole plan mapped out to take Taejong hunting and power level his combat skills, but his newly adopted dad had shut it down, warning him that the starving monsters outside made the wilderness way too dangerous. Instead of letting our boy join the upcoming subjugation battle, the commander had revealed a massive twist. He was shipping him off to a military academy that takes 6 grueling years to graduate from. Before the kid could even protest this derailment of his survival timeline, Hayden had abruptly shifted the conversation to the boy's recent chat with Daphne. He leans over his desk and casually drops a terrifying truth. He already knows Luna Moon was a player. Our hero freezes, realizing the man he's been conning has known about transmigrators this whole time. 10 years ago, Luna Moon had been just a strange woman standing in the snow, always speaking of absurd things. Hayden had been unable to bring himself to believe her wild claims back then. But back in the present, he buries his face in his hands, confessing his bitter regret over not realizing it was their final meeting. He had wished he listened to her a little more closely back then, a regret our boy quietly takes in. During that time, the warlord had married Daphne for a specific reason, a choice orchestrated entirely by Luna herself. The moment she had realized she was pregnant, she had disappeared into the cold, leaving behind only a letter that ordered him to take the commander's seat and marry his current wife. Though he still has countless unanswered questions for her, he's just grateful to have finally found his son. So he affectionately gives Haytham a free pass to cause as much trouble as he wants, as long as he stays far away from the subjugation battle, much to the kid's annoyance. Back in his room, our boy maps out the relationship dynamics, realizing that Daphne didn't actually drive Luna away, but the true ticking clock is the second apocalypse dropping in exactly 10 years, and he absolutely cannot afford to waste 6 of them stuck in a military academy. He knows he can't casually warn the top brass about the end of the world without sounding like a lunatic, and outright confessing that he's a transmigrated player would probably earn him a swift execution order from his beloved new dad. Left with no other options, he leans over his desk and searches for a solid excuse to explain his future knowledge without exposing his true identity. A few weeks ago, a tense conversation under the estate's ornate chandelier had set the stage, as the commander had offered a mutual exchange of secrets, and Haytham had baited the man by asking why he wasn't surprised to learn his mother's true identity. The teen looks the warlord dead in the eye and drops the classic web novel lie, claiming with a straight face that he is a regressor who traveled back in time. It's a massive leap in logic, but the sheer weight of the confession leaves the veteran completely stunned. Our hero presses his advantage, pointing out that given the circumstances, the warlord can't afford to just brush the absurd claim aside. Earlier, the older man's lingering grief over losing Luna Moon once before had given his lie the perfect emotional leverage as heavy footsteps had echoed across the tiled floor. Hayden had demanded to know why his son had waited until now to reveal this truth, prompting the teen to smoothly explain that they simply didn't have much time left. Back in the current moment, against the backdrop of a shattered clock face, the boy delivers his ultimate warning. In exactly 10 years, a second apocalypse will arrive, and he refuses to live through that regret all over again. The heavy doors to the commander's office creak open, and Hayden looks up from his desk as Mersault formally reports back for duty. Fresh out of disciplinary confinement, the warlord welcomes him back with a dry note about how he spent his entire punishment cooped up in the lab. But the aide immediately pivots to a much more pressing concern. He wants to know if the rumors about our boy participating in the military academy's brutal training are actually true, which Hayden casually confirms, adding that he's finalizing the schedule with the principal today. Mersault can't hide his worry, pointing out that despite the boy's terrifying skills, he's still just a child, one who could suffer a fatal injury if he lets his guard down against those ruthless cadets for even a single second. He adds that the rest of the top brass are already sweating over the decision, but Hayden just leans back, reflecting on the countless battles he and his aide have survived together. He explains that surviving the apocalypse requires more than just cold logic, demanding a blind trust in the gut feelings that dictate the razor-thin margin between life and death, though he admits he couldn't believe the kid's absurd claims at first either. He remembers it clearly, the chilling moment our boy warned him of a second apocalypse, and the sheer shock that washed over the commander at the sudden prophecy. The kid fully acknowledges how insane his story sounds, but he leans in, his eyes burning with an intensity that sends shivers down the warlord's spine as he claims that after dying a miserable death, he has regressed back into his 10-year-old body. He passionately declares that he will use this second chance to stop the end of the world, no matter the cost, and challenges the commander to look at his unnatural military knowledge as proof of his wild claims. He smoothly dodges any demands for future predictions by explaining that his very presence in the past has already caused the timeline to diverge, offering concrete proof of his value instead of vague prophecies. Our hero formally requested permission to enter the military academy's elite simulation, a bold demand that completely caught Hayden off guard. Publicly, the Colazone Military Academy was just a standard training ground that taught basic combat and monster subjugation to the next generation, but hidden beneath the surface was a highly classified curriculum, a brutal, realistic anti-personnel war game designed to pit human against human. It forced the most experienced cadets to tear each other apart, all to forge the ultimate elite for an inevitable bloody war against the other zones. When Hayden had demanded to know how a slum kid knew about top-secret military operations, our boy hadn't missed a beat, arrogantly declaring he had already graduated from the academy in his past life. He placed a hand over his heart and promised to prove his words with undeniable results. And as he looked down at the bowing child, the commander made the choice to trust him. Back in the present, Hayden looks over the finalized training documents and asks Mersault if he looks like a man swayed by personal bias. The silver-haired aide flinches, painfully aware that his boss now views the boy as his own flesh and blood. But Hayden just stares out the window, knowing the old ways of defending the zone are no longer enough, and he has chosen to gamble on his intuition, hoping this mysterious child is the weapon they need to survive. Meanwhile, at the imposing fortress of the military academy, our boy finds himself standing in the principal's office, face to face with the scarred leader of the facility. But it isn't the old man who catches him off guard, it's the cadet standing right beside him, as Platon, the academy's top student, firmly declares that an unenrolled child has absolutely no place in their brutal training. Haytham immediately recognizes the teen from his game knowledge as the son of Chief Anlon, a prodigy who refuses to rely on his father's political power, earning the genuine respect of every single peer. The palpable tension in the room is thick as the adults try to mediate the sudden standoff. Platon rigidly sticks to the rulebook, flatly refusing to let an unenrolled civilian risk his life. The principal rubs his temples in frustration and reminds the stubborn prodigy that the commander himself approved the request, but the top cadet doesn't back down an inch. He angrily shoots down the older man's nervous suggestion to just go easy on the young master, though surprisingly, our boy chimes in to completely agree with his new rival. He politely but firmly tells the sweating administrator that he doesn't want any special treatment, arrogantly declaring that he is only here to evaluate the academy's so-called elite cadets for himself. The top cadet stares at the boy, the rumors of his eccentric personality suddenly making perfect sense, and steps forward to warn the kid that this simulation is as close to real war as it gets and could leave him severely injured. But our hero just stares back with dead, unfazed eyes, a blank look that Platon mistakenly interprets as a commendable eagerness to learn. Taking pity on the child, he volunteers to join his squad to personally protect him and keep the match balanced. But Haytham instantly shoots the idea down. The adults assume he is just being proud, trying to lecture him on the value of teamwork. But the kid shatters their expectations, bluntly stating that if they share a team, he won't be able to crush Platon and prove his superiority. Haytham looks him dead in the eye and drops the innocent act, coldly declaring that actually enrolling in this academy would be a massive waste of his time. Earlier today, our boy stepped right into the academy's anti-personnel simulation as the instructor laid out the rules, where victory was simple: either wipe out the enemy squad or capture their flag, with uniform sensors tracking every fatal hit to keep the cadets on their toes. But before they could begin, the blonde cadet raised his hand, suggesting they swap the training ground to make things fair since it was the new kid's first run. But Haytham calmly declined the handicap, brimming with arrogance as he cheerfully declared he'd win regardless of the terrain. His cocky attitude visibly irritated his own squad, and absolutely infuriated the opposing instructor, who couldn't stomach a 10-year-old looking down on them. Jumping to the present as the simulation kicks off, Team B grumbles about our boy strutting around like he owns the place, convinced his refusal to change the terrain is just a built-in excuse for when he inevitably loses, until Lucas steps in, honorably shutting down the gossip and warning them not to talk behind the kid's back. Meanwhile, the blue-haired cadet corners a startled Vons, cocking his rifle as he explains exactly why Haytham chose to go solo. He points out that incooperative allies are a massive liability, a direct call-out to Vons's earlier behavior, and reminds him that if the commander's son actually got hurt, the cadets who failed to protect him would face severe consequences, which just leaves the third and final reason. The blue-haired cadet finishes his lecture by pointing out that our boy's small stature makes him the ultimate stealth operative in this snowy terrain. Across the forest, Platon's squad comes to the exact same conclusion, deducing that the kid is operating alone for one very specific reason. He's bypassing them entirely to make a beeline straight for their flag. Knowing there's no way he could take them all in a head-on fight, the cadets anticipate a sneaky approach, and they're suddenly hit with the collective revelation that his earlier insults must have been a calculated strategy to rile them up. The team cheerfully assumes he actually respects them, though Platon silently notes that the brat was definitely just looking down on them, but he decides to roll with their newfound enthusiasm anyway, using the ridiculous misunderstanding to rally his teammates and get their heads in the game. Platon orders the squad to march straight toward Haytham's position and make as much noise as possible, with the pink-haired cadet outlining a lethal contingency plan to snipe the kid if he manages to slip past the front line. The blonde cadet nods to confirm the strategy, snaps his goggles down and barks the order to flush out their rabbit. The squad charges into the snowy woods fully mobilized for a hunt, and as two of them patrol the tree line they spot something strange buried in the powder, completely unaware that high above them in the branches our boy is watching the clustered group through his binoculars, highly amused that they're practically begging for a team wipe. Seeing them bunched up perfectly on the slope below, he prepares his ambush, and just as the spiky black-haired cadet suddenly senses the danger, gunshots rip through the howling wind as our hero finally makes his move. Meanwhile, back at the base, the gray-haired cadet silently observes the snowy perimeter, tightening his grip on his rifle as he hears the distant warning shots echo through the trees. He knows the enemy is heading his way, and he's not about to let his guard down. Years ago, Vons received a stern warning from Platon's father, who told him that underestimating the commander's son would only make him look foolish, a lecture the arrogant teen initially brushed off while doing one-handed push-ups. Seeing our boy's genuinely innocent smile, Vons finally gets it. That grin isn't some strategic facade but the look of a predator who thoroughly enjoys toying with its prey. Meanwhile, deeper in the snowy forest, Lucas suddenly realizes the trees have gone dead silent. Panic spikes as he suspects his entire squad has already been wiped off the map. And before the blonde cadet can even react, a blue paint round explodes right next to him. Elsewhere, a black boot crunches into the snow as Hatham casually steps into view to confront Platon, who watches from the foreground. Our hero calmly acknowledges Platon's skill, leaving the top cadet completely rattled by his sudden appearance, and as the ash-blonde cadet scrambles behind cover to demand how he was found, the kid casually reveals he just used the process of elimination. Platon tries to stall with more questions, desperately trying to pinpoint Hatham's exact location to turn the tables. Meanwhile, across the snowy battlefield, one of his masked subordinates notices an eerie silence settling over the trees. The realization hits the light brown-haired cadet that their target has completely vanished, just a split second before a blue paint round blasts into his rifle. Hatham steps right up to the stunned scout, coldly explaining that a mask can't hide a person's height or the way they walk. Another silver-haired cadet is knocked flat on his back, screaming in pure disbelief, while a blonde sniper desperately scans the tree line through his scope only to realize he's been completely played. His crosshairs are locked on nothing but an abandoned rifle propped up in the snow as a decoy, and the terrifying reality finally hits the remaining cadets. Our hero's 10-year-old body makes him so small and light that his footsteps are practically non-existent. Exploiting that flawless stealth, Hatham drops from the branches above and buries his training blade right into the final target's chest. A massive system notification blares across the sky, officially announcing that Team A has been entirely wiped out, handing Team B the undisputed victory. In the aftermath, Vaughn stares at an abandoned rifle and asks if his entire squad was just wiped out, realizing he never stood a chance as he sits defeated and covered in blue paint, especially when our boy casually holds up a paint bottle, proudly asserting that he can manage just fine on his own. Hatham plops down next to the teen, effortlessly dismantling his failed sniper strategy to prove his absolute tactical dominance, though moments ago, he had already revealed his true motive for joining the simulation. Settling in next to Platon on a pile of sandbags, Hatham praised the top cadet's quick judgment and flawless leadership. He looked the older boy right in the eye, declaring that he had officially passed the test, and with a perfectly manipulative smile, offered him the ultimate prize, the highly coveted position of becoming his personal adjutant. The aftermath of that chaotic simulation quickly lands right on Commander Hayden's desk, where Salt slides over a compiled report of the surviving cadets' evaluations, and the warlord silently reviews the terrifying testimonies, including one furious cadet who recounts exactly how cowardly the dark-haired boy acted. During the simulation in the snowy forest, our boy crept up on two masked cadets from behind, used a fake secret message from the commander to lower their guard, and then immediately blasted them with his handgun. The black-haired cadet with censored eyes broke into a cold sweat as his teammates instantly dropped, while another scout found one of the bodies face down in the snow, only for the supposed corpse to suddenly lunge up and drive a knife into his gut. Back in the present, the pink-haired cadet notes that this guy didn't fight like a kid at all. Predicting movement routes is basic strategy, but executing it with such ruthless precision is the work of a seasoned veteran. In her memory of the snowy forest, he executed the mission with a chilling lack of tension, gliding through the snow as if he'd fought them 100 times before. Back in the office, the post-match evaluations paint a picture of a monster. The grayish-blue-haired cadet simply stares blankly when asked about our boy's skills, while the blue-haired female cadet is left utterly confused by the claim that he's some kind of god. Salt rationalizes the reports, assuming the kids are just marveling at the young master's raw talent, but his assumptions are shattered when Commander Hayden calls him in, and officially grants Hatham overall command of the upcoming subjugation operation. The bombshell sends shockwaves through the military brass, Later, our hero confidently asserts his new authority over the operation, and while Mersault remains the official commander on paper just to prevent a political uprising, the older man genuinely warns the boy that real combat is far deadlier than a mock battle. In his memory of the meeting, Mersault openly admitted the kid's skills were unnervingly outstanding, but quickly pointed out a glaring anomaly in his custom subjugation route, questioning how the team could possibly know the terrain so perfectly without having been there before. Our hero smoothly deflected the suspicion, though he internally sweated as the aide dug dangerously close to his fake regressor backstory. Hatham slams his hand on the table and redirects the room's focus away from the map to their wildly inefficient combat methods. He brings up the standard military doctrine of tying monsters down just to locate their gems, bluntly calls the whole routine a massive waste of time, and proposes they skip the messy brawl entirely by destroying the core right from the start. The others immediately push back since gem locations vary wildly between species, and Mersault adds that finding a weak point on a massive beast is practically impossible. My guy just listens with a blank stare while they dismiss his strategy as a total pipe dream. But a sly smile creeps across our hero's face, because he remembers exactly how many mountains of beasts he slaughtered across his multiple playthroughs. The lore dictates that these gems act as vital organs always nestled in the most heavily protected parts of their anatomy. So after enough runs, just seeing a footprint gives him an intuitive sense of exactly where to strike. He looks Mersault dead in the eye and casually declares that he already knows every single weak point, leaving the older man completely speechless as the boy assures the room that this subjugation is going to be executed with terrifying efficiency. Years ago, he spent countless nights in his dark bedroom, memorizing the game's entire wiki just to feed his addiction. Hatham relaxes in his room later that night, pretty satisfied with how the meeting went, but the moment he pulls up the global system chat, his hand freezes over the glowing blue screen. A message from Totus Possible asks a question that makes his blood run cold, wondering why there are 2 dopamine addicts active in the chat. Our boy notices a massive backlog of unread notifications clogging the group window, and scrolls up to see what triggered the panic. A ping from Junkie mentions a strange DM sent by someone using his exact username. In a memory of earlier today, he dealt with Safe Zone 8 trying to steal his identity, and now, back in the present, he wonders if a brand new imposter just spawned into the server. The chat logs reveal that almost everyone in the room received the exact same mysterious broadcast. They debate the suspicious message, building a collective sense of dread as they hesitate to actually open it. Finally, God drops the raw text into the chat, a chilling confirmation that interaction with zones outside the unicorn zone is now possible. Hatham shoots straight up in bed, completely floored by the realization that this lore-breaking bombshell was sent under his own ID. The chat immediately erupts into chaos, with Home Protector stepping in to insist it has to be a fake since their private messages are completely blocked. Scanning the logs, our boy recalls the original game's lore, that protective barriers are supposed to seal off every zone until the second apocalypse hits. He stares out into the night, resolving to personally verify those boundaries during the upcoming subjugation, until a sudden chilling realization stops him cold. Why would the high-stat player from the Unicorn Zone pull a stunt like this? The rest of the chat deduces the exact same thing, at least until Junkie chimes in to point out a terrifying anomaly in the public roster. Hatham immediately pulls up the participant list. He counts exactly 8 names from top to bottom, finding absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. But as the other users start panicking over the headcount, the horrifying truth finally clicks. Everyone else hasn't been looking at an 8-person roster. They've been seeing 2 identical DOPAMINEADDICT IDs on their screens this entire time. He taps the duplicate name just to be sure, and the window instantly prompts him to send a friend request. A cold sweat breaks out as the terrifying reality sets in. A 9th player has been lurking in the chat from the very start. He frantically opens his private messages, finding a wall of desperate texts from Home Protector demanding to know what the hell is going on. The guy is absolutely panicking, begging for confirmation that his favorite gamer hasn't lost his mind, but it's the next notification from him that makes our hero's blood run cold. The imposter didn't just drop a random troll message in the global chat. They've been actively DMing Home Protector, casually referencing details from their private conversations as if they were the ones who lived through them. This fake has perfectly hijacked his entire identity, and as he glares into the glowing blue screen, Hatham demands to know exactly who the hell is playing his game. Pacing around his dark room, Our boy impatiently waits for a response from the one person who might have answers. He shoots a message over to the imposter T. Baoram in the knife zone. The psycho immediately fires back to mock him for being dumb enough to accept 2 friend requests from the exact same username. Hatham just smirks, genuinely amused by the guy's predictable rage. But he still needs to figure out how the fake dopamine addict found out about their private chats. T. Baoram completely dismisses the question and fires off an insult that Hatham is the weird one. However, he casually drops a massive clue. The imposter is hiding out in the unicorn zone. Our hero immediately demands proof. T. Baoram remembers it clearly. Recently, he completed an item trade with the imposter and received a handful of tangerines, which was a glaring detail, because in a world ravaged by a global ice age, fresh produce was impossible to find unless it came from the floating city of scientists known as the Unicorn Zone. With its self-sustaining ecosystem, it's the only place on Earth that could still pull off a harvest, and our boy's mind races as he officially locks in the imposter's exact coordinates. When T. Baoram asks if he's going to investigate, Hatham casually types back that he'll just let the fake clear the zone for him. Reading that sheer, unfiltered audacity on his screen, T. Baoram is left completely speechless. Our hero confronts his past self, the original author of the game guide, wondering if he can really tear down an iron fortress built on his own strategies, only for his older persona to chuckle at the sudden hesitation, and remind the kid that he used to specialize in countering these exact setups, so there's absolutely no reason to act like a win is out of reach. Back in the chat, my guy learns exactly why his rival is so obsessed with him, since the game's AI constantly recommended T. Baoram as an opponent for spending all his time trying to beat Dopamine Addict. But despite the flattering rivalry, Hatham runs the numbers and realizes he only has about a 60% chance of winning a head-on fight right now. The technological gap between their zones is a massive hurdle, but that just means he needs to find another way to break the game. Surprisingly, T. Baoram actually agrees to keep him updated, dropping his hostile act to be unusually obedient. But before Hatham can overthink it, a fresh barrage of notifications floods the screen. It's Couche Potato, absolutely losing his mind over the fact that a second dopamine addict is operating out of their main base. The frantic fanboy begs his idol to keep a past promise and carry him to the Unicorn Zone. Annoyed by the clinging, Hatham tosses back a completely non-committal response. He quickly pivots to a much more serious warning. If the zone barriers are truly down, high-level players will start raiding the lower difficulty areas first. The realization hits him that Couche Potato is stationed dangerously close to the love zone, and our boy already has a terrible premonition about Manson, the cult leader who controls that territory. Closing his eyes in the dark, Hatham resolves to face whatever comes his way without taking a single loss. A cold determination he carries straight into the snowy wilderness, where heavy boots crunch through the deep powder, and Taejong's loud complaints about the brutal military life thoroughly annoy our hero. Earlier today, the squad was first deployed into the snow to test the new combat rations and hunt, where Mersault watched over them with a creepy, proud father smile despite only being 20 years old, which did absolutely nothing to calm Taejong's nerves as he scanned the freezing wasteland, especially since the silver-haired aide was busy promising a safe trip while completely ignoring the massive monster footprint stamped right next to them. Back in the present, the boys discuss their actual target, an injured furry crocodile spotted earlier that morning, and Mersault explains they plan to extract its gem without ruining the edible meat, relying entirely on our hero's game knowledge to pull it off, which earns a confident nod from Hatham. But Couche Potato shifts the focus to their new combat rations, inspecting a piece that looks exactly like a star-shaped candy. And while the aide enthusiastically pitches its nutritional value, the blonde fanboy turns to ask Hatham about his healing abilities, correctly deducing that he can heal others through physical contact, though instead of answering, Hatham just shoots him a smug, sparkling look of absolute pride. Couche Potato immediately calls him out on the silent insult, but their bickering is cut short when the blonde raises a gloved hand to signal a halt. As our boy spots their target up ahead, a massive furry crocodile collapsed in the snow, and when Taejong points out a visible wound on its right flank, Hatham analyzes its defensive posture, deducing the beast went down specifically to protect that injured side, so without hesitation he levels his rifle and fires a perfect shot straight into its left abdomen to hit its true weak point. Mersault is left in awe as the bullet perfectly shatters the monster's hidden gem, while Hatham casually orders a grumbling Couche Potato to fire a signal flare for transport, explaining to the silver-haired aide that this pinpoint execution minimizes the loss of edible parts, only to be caught off guard when Mersault praises him as the true son of the hero of the subjugation battle. But seeing that the aide is strangely excited about the zone's prosperity, rather than suspicious of his unnatural game knowledge, Hatham decides to just keep moving, until a loud mechanical humming noise suddenly echoes from the sky. Our boy looks up in absolute shock as a figure drops out of the clouds on a glowing blue hoverboard, and Couche Potato points a trembling finger at the approaching stranger. The silver-haired man touching down in the snow isn't just some random player. He is the endgame AI clone of Dopamine Addict himself. With that signature bushy white hair and those dead black eyes, the newcomer stands out as a face every veteran Safe Zone player knows, making Couche Potato and Taejong freeze in absolute shock, as the red-haired cadet frantically calls out to his boss while another squadmate just shakes his head in disbelief, and Mersault keeps his rifle dead steady on the target, acknowledging Haytham's order to hold his fire. But Couche Potato is already sprinting forward, completely starstruck as he thinks he's finally meeting his idol, Dopamine Addict. Taejong immediately grabs the blonde fanboy's arm to yank him back from the danger zone, warning a thoroughly confused Couche Potato that this isn't the guy they remember. And even as the blonde insists it has to be him, a sickeningly sinister aura projects from the white-haired man's shadow, prompting our boy to step up, ready to set the record straight on his own identity. But the AI clone drops right down in front of him, taunting the squad leader to just use the view profile feature. Haytham pulls up his system menu, knowing a quick scan is the easiest way to rip away the disguise and get the guy's real stats. Still, our boy can't shake the feeling that this whole setup is incredibly sketchy, noting that not only does the intruder look exactly like his old custom character, but he's also the only one walking around this frozen wasteland in a fully grown adult body, and when the blonde cadet points to himself, asking if the man recognizes him, he is stunned as the clone casually drops his old forum handle. Our hero just smirks, highly amused that the adult recognized the fanboy first, while the rest of the squad quickly surrounds the white-haired intruder, locking him down at gunpoint. Couche Potato questions the sudden hostility, but Taejong defends their raised rifles as standard military protocol, and the clone just smiles reassuringly, claiming he didn't come all this way to hurt anyone. Though the red-haired cadet isn't buying a single word of it, unfazed, the man mocks the tense soldier, pointing out that he's too scared to even use the system's basic profile scan. So Taejong, frustrated but knowing the guy is right, finally swallows his hesitation and opens his status window. The holographic display flares to life, confirming the impossible. The man's name and title both read DOPAMINEADDICT. The red-haired cadet breaks into a cold sweat, while our boy checks his own system window, zeroing in on the insane fact that the intruder actually has his username equipped as a literal title, a mechanic he didn't even know existed in this version of the game. And when Taejong immediately rounds on Haytham demanding to know how he pulled off such a massive stunt, my guy coldly shuts him down, stating it's way too early to reveal his secrets. Before the bickering can escalate, the white-haired man interrupts, putting their little chat on hold to check something else. The man briefly wonders why his younger self is traveling with Mersault, considering he would have just poisoned the aide and been done with it. Meanwhile, Couche Potato stares at the white-haired man, wondering if he's just some lunatic role-player who took his obsession way too far. But then a sudden, glaring realization finally hits the blonde fanboy like a freight train. He points out the massive anomaly staring them right in the face, demanding to know why this guy is a full-grown adult when everyone else spawned into the game as 10-year-olds. The clone just sighs and openly mocks the kid for taking this long to notice the absolute most obvious detail in the room, turning to our hero to condescendingly ask if the blonde is really too stupid to keep around as a partner before casually reaching inside his lab coat to just do them all a favor and eliminate the dead weight. The rest of the squad instantly snaps their weapons up in response, and a deafening barrage of gunfire erupts, knocking the man backward with the sheer force of the blast. Couche Potato screams at Taejong for firing at a fellow player, but the red-haired cadet points out it was only a warning shot, and a pointless one at that, as a digital shield flares around the man's body to prove they couldn't kill him anyway. The clone simply brushes off the hostility and agrees that he would have done the exact same thing, declaring his little assessment complete as he hovers safely above the squad, and cryptically adds that he only came out here to see if his younger self was growing up well. Taejong glares up at him, infuriated by the veteran's condescending attitude but painfully aware their rifles can't even leave a scratch, until the white-haired man suddenly pauses mid-departure. The clone aims a massive futuristic rifle downward to leave them a parting gift, and as the barrel locks dead onto a terrified Couche Potato, a deafening shot rings out, but Haytham throws himself directly into the line of fire. He takes the brutal blast straight to the chest, screaming in agony as blood splatters across the snow while the attacker just lowers his weapon with an ice-cold stare. He mutters that this foolish sacrifice proves our guy really is different from him, and finally flies off into the sky as Taejong desperately screams for his boss. Mersault quickly drops to examine the wound, breathing a sigh of relief that the blast missed our hero's vitals before announcing he'll go assemble the soldiers, ordering Taejong to patrol the perimeter to keep the monsters at bay, and leaving Haytham alone with Couche Potato. as the agonizing pain of the injury finally makes his small frame tremble. The blonde fanboy completely loses his grip on reality, screaming that the dopamine addict he knows is a ruthless killer, not some noble martyr, and stares down at his idol in absolute shock, demanding to know why he would ever take a bullet for a guy like him. Our boy just looks up with a calm, calculating stare and asks why he thinks he did it, before pulling out a small blue crystal and bluntly demanding to be healed, leaving the cadet completely baffled. Then it clicks. In a flashback, Couche Potato discussed his touch-based food absorption, and now the horrifying realization dawns on him that this absolute madman intentionally took a lethal hit just to test his healing mechanic. Couche Potato furiously berates my guy for being a total psychopath, but still presses a glowing green hand to Haytham's chest to close the gruesome wound. With his HP finally stabilized, our boy drops the act and calls Couche Potato by his real name, Han Yobom, declaring he has a confession to make, ordering the suddenly anxious blonde teen to lend him an ear, before leaning in close to whisper the ultimate earth-shattering truth of exactly who he really is. Out in the snowy wilderness, Couche Potato completely loses his mind upon realizing the absolute psychopath he's been traveling with is his ultimate idol. He grabs our boy by the collar and screams in disbelief that he's actually dopamine addict, but Haytham calmly points out he wouldn't have believed him anyway, which leaves the blonde fanboy cringing at the memory of all the toxic comments he used to leave on his hero's posts. A sudden memory hits him of moments ago, when Couche Potato intentionally only partially healed Haytham's gruesome wound with his glowing green magic to keep him alive without raising Mersalt's suspicions. Snapping back to the present, Couche Potato complains about being the only one left in the dark while Taejong knew the truth the whole time, but Haytham explains he only told the red-haired cadet because the first imposter was hanging around him. The blonde shudders, noting that unlike the first fake, this new AI clone is genuinely murderous, and our hero agrees since the clone somehow bypassed system restrictions to unlock the unicorn zone. This sparks a terrifying deduction that the zone barriers must be down if the clone traveled all the way here, but the most glaring anomaly is that the white-haired player is the only one who looks like an adult. Couche Potato theorizes it might be some kind of forced growth technology, perhaps involving a glowing blue tank, but Haytham immediately rejects the idea and points to a much deeper reason. He knows for a fact that he is the real dopamine addict, but the striking similarities between him and the white-haired adult are impossible to ignore, though more than anything, our boy is just incredibly annoyed that the guy treated him like a literal child. Their plotting is abruptly cut short when Taejong comes sprinting through the snow to announce Mersalt's return, which prompts Couche Potato to shoot his idol a dead serious look and warn him to keep his mouth shut about everything they just discussed. So Haytham immediately drops back onto the stretcher with a pathetic groan, perfectly resuming his injured facade just as the others arrive. A few days ago at the commander's residence, officers gossiped in the halls about Hayden's ruthless lack of reaction to his son's near-fatal injury, while the iron-blooded commander himself stood over the boy's bed to coldly note his convenient healing abilities. He sternly interrogated the kid and demanded to know exactly who had been controlling him out there in the snow, but Haytham feigned total ignorance, carefully choosing his next words to navigate the tense standoff. Back in the present, our boy casually claims he used to know the attacker, but not anymore, prompting Hayden to immediately narrow his single eye and ask if it was someone from before his supposed regression. The realization claws at Haytham that Mersalt must have reported their slip-up with the word player during the hunt, and knowing he absolutely cannot let anyone dig into his true identity if he wants to skip out on his military academy sentence, he clutches his chest and formulates a calculated lie to shift the heat. He looks the commander dead in the eye and suggests a brand new player might have spawned as a direct result of his time-traveling meddling. Hayden completely buys the lie, finding the fabricated threat entirely plausible, and Haytham mentally celebrates his flawless manipulation, steering the warlord right off his trail. But his internal victory lap is cut short when he recalls the confusing order he was given to attend the military academy. A memory surfaces of a few days ago in the medical ward where the black-haired healer treating his wounds assumed the injuries were just the result of a regressor struggling to adapt to a child's body. The doctor gently patted his head, warning him that a single moment of carelessness could lead to the exact same tragic fate as Luna Moon. But the man then clarified that Haytham wouldn't actually need to stay at the academy for the full 6 years. He reflects that the plan is to just stick around until he adjusts to his new stats, leaving right before the next subjugation campaign kicks off. Our boy rationalizes the whole arrangement as a quick vacation to secure an officer's rank, though that silver lining shatters when he remembers the commander's absurd condition. He has to stay until he can physically dodge incoming bullets. Knowing how military academies work, he already knows how much the senior class is going to despise his special treatment. Sure enough, over at the academy classroom, rumors are already spreading like wildfire as unaware students openly mock Team A for losing to a 10-year-old. The defeated squad sits nearby, stewing in guilt over dragging down Platin's flawless reputation, until Hatham steps up to play the benevolent leader, reassuring his new lackeys that they fought fair and square. Earlier today, the bespectacled major placed a strict gag order on the simulation's results, leaving the humiliated teens completely unable to defend themselves. Earlier today, before the simulation even started, the morning class was buzzing with gossip about the commander's infamous son. The chatter only died down when the suited instructor called for their attention to make a massive announcement. The cadets listened in stunned silence, and the doors opened to officially introduce the pint-sized Lord Hayden to his new training group. Our boy flashes a hypocritically innocent smile, fully aware that this angelic little act is only going to make the victims of his last massacre resent him even more. When the suited instructor assumes there are no objections to his admission, a hand shoots up from the back. Lucas, the arrogant blonde cadet, rises from his desk to confront the kid directly, and boldly declares that while the 6 who lost might be pathetic idiots, the rest of the class isn't so weak. The young master fires right back, asking if they really think they have what it takes to beat him. The room erupts into offended murmurs at his sheer audacity, but he just steps forward, ready to settle this once and for all, and prove his victory was no fluke. Earlier today, the kid proposed a training exercise to settle the dispute. Lucas agreed, internally scoffing at his massive ego, and laid out the terms across a chessboard, suggesting a 6-on-6 match pitting the young commander and his losers against the rest of the elite. My guy accepted the challenge, but casually dropped that he'd be adding his own special condition. With a cocky smirk, he declared his terms. If even a single member of his squad was eliminated, he'd forfeit the match, and on the flip side, if just one of the elites managed to survive the hunt, they'd take the win. It was a handicap so insanely arrogant that Lucas could only glare back in silence, absolutely seething at the disrespect. In the dorms, Hatham's squad is already planning their funerals, cornering our boy in his room and screaming about the absolutely insane handicap he just slapped on their upcoming match, terrified that with their track record, a single death means they're all getting expelled. But the young master just calmly analyzes the panic, recalling how Lucas and his elite team had looked down on them earlier today, and how he had turned that condescension right back around. His sharp retort had made Lucas flinch, pushing the elite cadet to threaten to completely wipe them out in front of the entire academy. So now, Hatham spins that exact threat to manipulate his squad's bruised egos, knowing from his countless playthroughs that these kids are destined to become crucial NPCs. Right now though, they're just a bunch of sulking teenagers still reeling from losing to a 10-year-old. So he explains he only came down early to unpack, but seeing this pathetic display, he decides to dangle a carrot to keep his future workers motivated. He asks the squad why they think he chose them for this specific match, holding up a hand to command their attention as he waits for one of the cadets to puff out his chest and arrogantly claim it's because they're the absolute best, a delusion our hero immediately feeds with an approving nod. When the white-haired cadet nervously brings up their past miserable defeat, Hatham spins the insane handicap as a grand stage to prove their worth, rhetorically asking if he only crushed them last time because of favorable conditions, as he reminds Vons of how easily his sniper trap was dismantled. He admits his tactics might seem a little dirty, but promises that if they follow his lead he'll hand them an absolute victory. Later, while unpacking his books, our boy reaches for a high shelf, and violently winces as a sharp pain shoots through his shoulder. He's been intentionally suppressing his game body's healing to keep the wound open, knowing Mersault is watching him like a hawk. He remembers it clearly. Platon had approached him in the academy library, and when our boy brushed off his offer of assistance, the top cadet dropped a bombshell, revealing he knew all about the gunshot wound. Hatham was initially stunned, since Commander Hayden had slapped a strict gag order on the incident, but he quickly realized his dramatic hospital stunt had drawn way too much attention, and deduced that Platon's father, Chief Anlon, must have leaked the classified intel to his son. Armed with that secret, the noble cadet urged him to postpone the training simulation until he fully recovered. Back in the present, our boy realizes the top cadet's bleeding heart is the perfect tool to exploit, as Platon brings up the harsh mockery Team A is facing and asks if the young commander is disappointed in his squad. Never one to miss a cue, Hatham feigns a hardened, heroic resolve, claiming he needs this upcoming match to prove his team's true competence to everyone. An act the blonde cadet swallows hook, line, and sinker. Platon eagerly pledges to do whatever it takes to win the exercise so his injured commander can finally rest. With the trap perfectly set, Hatham lays out the reality of the 6-on-6 setup, using a slick chess metaphor to illustrate the evenly matched teams, as he explains that to tip the scales a major sacrifice has to be made. Cashing in on that blind pledge to do absolutely anything, the young mastermind had looked straight up at the top cadet and explicitly asked him to drop out of the match for the sake of the team. The day of the second training simulation arrives. The snowy mountain terrain is freezing and unforgiving, and Lucas stands guard with his rifle as he takes charge of Team B. He checks in with his perimeter watch and notes that the scouting party is still out, but as they hold their positions, sudden whispers start to ripple through the ranks. Rumors are flying that Platin actually deserted Team A, completely throwing the cadets who know he's famous for protecting stragglers. But word on the mountain is that he just called the match a lost cause and walked away. The squad assumes the top cadet just got sick of babysitting a naive young master, but Lucas keeps his mouth shut, picturing the kid's terrifyingly sharp gaze and wondering if a truly clueless brat would bother memorizing every single soldier's name. He warns his crew to keep their guard up and not repeat Team A's fatal mistake, when he suddenly spots his forward scouts sprinting back way ahead of schedule. They skid to a halt, completely breathless, and frantically report that they've found something bizarre, pointing a trembling finger toward a tiny figure collapsed face down in the snow right outside their perimeter. The scouts had crept up on the motionless child, realizing it had to be our boy, but doubting anyone would use themselves as such a brazen trap. Connecting the dots with the rumors of Platin's sudden desertion, Lucas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather, completely swallowing the bait as he assumed the rival squad had ruthlessly mutinied and left their young commander to freeze to death. Swallowing the bait completely, Lucas hauls our supposedly unconscious hero back to Team B's main camp, where the remaining cadets are already sweating over how long the patrol is taking. Vons confidently shuts down the panic, smugly assuming the trash has already been taken out, and right on cue, Lucas emerges from the snowy tree line. But that arrogant grin instantly drops from Vons's face when he sees his teammate marching into camp with a bound, seemingly helpless Hatham. Wasting absolutely no time, my guy immediately launches into a desperate sob story. In his fabricated tale, his squad violently turns on him the second the match starts, framing them as ruthless mutineers who completely refuse to follow his strict survival rules. Back in reality, he pitifully claims they stripped him of his weapons and left him to freeze. When the skeptical cadets ask if he actually benched Platin, Hatham just nods with a perfectly innocent expression. Rewind to a few hours ago. Hatham had secretly ordered Platin to step down to avoid a clash of leaders. Back in the present, Team B immediately falls into a heated debate over whether to execute their prisoner. As some completely buy the lie and assume the opposing squad is out for blood, the group fractures between those who feel sorry for the kid and those who want to finish the match, making one scout realize this tiny captive is already tearing their teamwork apart, arguing that an easy victory over a betrayed child won't earn them any real glory. But another cadet aggressively demands they kill Hatham and end the simulation. He even spins his combat knife to do the deed himself, completely unaware that our guy is already subtly loosening his ropes. Before the blade can drop, Vaughn steps up to override the squad and take command of the chaotic situation. He orders Cohen and Harry to stay behind and guard the prisoner alongside their flag. And as he leads the main assault force away, our hero watches with his hands completely free. With his trap officially set, the main assault squad pushes deep into the snowy forest, where Lucas voices his disappointment in Vons's heavy-handed leadership. Unfazed, the black-haired cadet defends his call by reminding them that their true goal is just to humble the arrogant brat. Lucas can't argue with that, desperate to wipe the smug look off our hero's face once and for all. Everyone else chimes in to agree they'd rather secure an honorable victory than execute an unresisting prisoner, but their righteous moment is shattered when a red signal flare suddenly shrieks into the sky. Panic sets in as they realize the distress signal came directly from their own camp, and as they sprint frantically back through the trees, Lucas spots something horrifying. Their team's blue flag is violently splattered with orange paint, and standing right beneath it is our boy, clutching his arm and absolutely drenched in the same orange paint. As the returning scouts frantically demand an explanation, Hatham flawlessly slips back into his victim act to claim his own teammates just ambushed the camp. He stammers that Cohen and Harry were dragged off into the woods right after firing the flare, but proudly declares he used his own body as a human shield to protect their flag, prompting Vons to cock his rifle as he swallows the lie, hook, line, and sinker. Convinced the mutineers are still lurking nearby, Vons takes charge again and orders Lucas to lead the rest of the squad on a perimeter sweep. Lucas nods, playing right into my guy's hands, and marches out of the camp to leave the prisoner behind. Vons just watches them disappear into the trees, finally securing the total isolation he wanted. The second the patrol is out of sight, Vons drops the friendly act and aims his rifle point blank at our boy's head, though Hatham just smiles up at him, perfectly aware that the older cadet sent his squad away on purpose. Vons glares down through his goggles and admits he saw right through the kid's manipulation of his gullible teammates, pressing the barrel hard against Hatham's skull to end the training exercise right now. He sneers that he's never met a more annoying brat in his whole life, only for a new voice directly behind him to casually agree. Vons's finger twitches on the trigger with a sharp click, but Hatham's innocent facade instantly melts into a cunning smirk as he corrects the guy's math. This was never a one-on-one. As the cloaked blue cadet suddenly steps out of the snow and aims his rifle straight at Vons's back, The masked teen whips around in sheer panic, realizing he's the one who just walked into a trap. Rewind to a few hours ago. Our hero had also ordered Platten to spread rumors about a mutiny to set the perfect bait for Team B. Vons realizes the entire mutiny story was a massive, calculated lie. He tries to reassure himself that he can still take on one regular cadet, but he turns back to find our boy aiming a handgun right at his face, cheerfully thanking him for sending Lucas away, and as the sniper screams in rage, a single gunshot rings out through the snowy forest. Following the gunshot that ended the simulation, our boy sits comfortably in Commander Hayden's office, where the warlord asks him to explain his winning strategy firsthand. The kid calmly replies that it was simple. The older cadets were already underestimating him, so he just set the stage to solidify that belief. He highlights the exercise's core rule, pointing out that if even one person is eliminated, the whole squad loses, which meant that by acting completely psychotic he painted his own teammates as the easiest targets on the board. In a flashback to the simulation, he headed directly into enemy territory and acted as bait, knowing the opposing team wouldn't waste time shooting a tied-up child when they only needed one kill to win. Back in the present, Hayden deduces that the boy's earlier argument with Platten was entirely staged. In a flashback to shortly after the simulation, the commander had one more question for his son, asking why he didn't just pull the flag during the initial ambush and end it immediately. Haytham arrogantly admitted that wrapping things up too quickly wouldn't have been any fun. Leaving that debrief, the young master walked down the Grand Academy hallway, deciding that with Hayden satisfied, it was finally time to deal with Platten. Meanwhile, the rest of the academy is in a state of absolute confusion over the simulation results, and rumors fly wild through the halls as the students try to piece together what actually happened out there. One guy complains that the sheer tension had him hearing things in the snow, but his mention of a terrifying threat to wipe out their squad makes a nearby student physically flinch. The frustration hits a breaking point when Vons furiously slams down a report, yelling at a rival squad for hiding behind a child, while the veterans of Team A comedically welcome him to the club of those who lost to a 10-year-old. Another teammate steps in to point out that even Lucas is keeping his mouth shut about the humiliating defeat, so the rest of the group jumps in to drag the bickering boys apart before a real brawl can break out. In a flashback to the post-simulation debrief, Platten pulled our boy aside in the hallway. He formally bowed his head to apologize for his team's blatant disrespect, and even retracted his own previous insults, before bluntly dropping the hammer that he still could not acknowledge the kid as a fellow cadet. He admitted the sheer talent was undeniable, but argued a true soldier wouldn't have treated the exercise like a playground. Vons passionately echoes that exact same sentiment to the rest of the squad, drawing murmurs of agreement from the battered teens. They all conclude that this 10-year-old is just a thrill-seeker who doesn't care about a real victory. But before the slander can spread any further, Platten steps up to fiercely defend his new commander's honor. He reveals the shocking truth that their leader was severely injured a few days ago while hunting a monster. Lucas instantly recalls the kid clutching his shoulder in the snow, the realization hitting him hard as Platten spins a heroic narrative that our hero postponed his own medical treatment just to restore their team's pride. In a flashback to the recent past, the top cadet passionately argued that their young commander had volunteered as bait despite his bleeding wound, demanding to know if that wasn't proof enough of his absolute right to lead. Platten awkwardly clears his throat as he finishes recounting his little PR campaign. Our hero realizes that his adjutant took it upon himself to manage his public image, and the stunt successfully turned the other cadet's sleazy glares into genuine respect. In a flashback to the day Platten came to his room, the older cadet bowed his head to apologize for letting the secret slip, but gripping his bedsheets, Haytham realized he couldn't let this golden opportunity slide and decided to exploit that heavy guilt by asking for a very specific favor to make up for the mistake. Though the straight-laced cadet immediately panicked at the thought of spreading more malicious gossip, the boy quickly shut that down, locking eyes with him and stating that his request was a mission only Platten was qualified to handle, hooking the older teen with the validation and prompting him to resolutely pledge to carry out whatever his commander asked, leaving the young mastermind highly satisfied with how easily he had played his new adjutant. His downtime is abruptly cut short when a system notification pings with a message from the chat user God, and our boy bolts upright, completely caught off guard as the user casually announces that the Love Zone has no interzone shield. In the game's lore, the first apocalypse wiped out most of the habitable land and forced the survivors to carve out 8 safe zones clustered into an area roughly the size of the Korean peninsula, which means that with the Cola Zone in the far north and the Knife Zone down south, these territories are practically right on top of each other. Since God is in the Love Zone and Home Protector is right next door in the Cigarette Zone, it's only a matter of time before the two cross paths. As Hatham scrolls through the window, the other players start wondering why the usually hyperactive home protector is being so suspiciously quiet today. But before anyone can investigate, God shocks the chat and proposes a real-life meetup. Our guy reads the messages in amusement as TOTESPOSSIBLE immediately insults God for having flowers for brains, but he knows that anyone who checked the zone shields this quickly definitely has an ulterior motive. He reflects that right now they are all just weak 10-year-olds who can't afford the massive risk of meeting up in person, so he takes the initiative as Junkie, voicing that exact same suspicion in the chat and demanding some honesty. God quickly defends the proposal, claiming it's just a goodwill gesture to help them stop the apocalypse together, but the group is already dripping with distrust, especially regarding the imposter dopamine addict who recently terrorized them. Cutting through the panic, Junkie boldly drops a message declaring they know exactly who God really is. Meanwhile, over in the love zone, the cult leader Manson reacts to the call-out with wide eyes. A slight amused smile creeps across her face, and looking out over her domain, she declares that things are finally getting interesting. In the system chat, the hooded player's message cuts through the noise to boldly declare he knows exactly who God is, making Manson's amused smile falter as she reads the direct call-out. And the hooded player doesn't stop there, exposing her inconsistent behavior before fiercely declaring his zone off-limits. The aggressive pushback immediately derails the meetup plans, putting the fake shaman on the defensive. But the person in the blue shirt shifts the focus entirely, dropping a massive bombshell about gathering the meteorite items to return home. A revelation that sends shockwaves through the other survivors who hadn't even considered the possibility. Though Manson remains highly skeptical of this supposed escape route, brandishing her revolver with a menacing smile while the weaker players sweat in terror. Issuing a grim ultimatum from his underwater confinement, the person in the blue shirt warns the chat against secretly joining forces. He threatens to sink the beer zone's meteorite straight to the bottom of the ocean if anyone tries to cross him. But the real chaos erupts when the imposter dopamine addict chimes in, casually claiming he's already met up with someone in real life. Our boy watches the system window absolutely melt down as the others panic over the impossible claim, knowing for a fact he didn't type a single word of that smug reply. Spooked out of their minds by the obvious impersonator, the group instantly aborts the meetup and abandons the public room entirely. Later, strolling through the academy halls, Hatham reflects on this mysterious ninth player, knowing that while the fake hasn't directly harmed him yet, their mere existence is giving off major ominous vibes, a suspicion confirmed when he intercepts a private DM where T. Bowram asks if he was the one the imposter met. The impersonator smoothly plays along on the other end, confirming the meetup but casually brushing off taking a bullet like it was just a scratch. Reading the logs, our boy sees exactly how the trap was sprung. T. Bowram only fell for the bait because the fake knew all about his constant death threats, but that detail throws a massive wrench into the timeline, since the imposter somehow has access to chat history from before the global room even opened, and since those direct messages were strictly off the record, a standard system AI built from his past game data couldn't possibly predict them. Stopping dead in the hallway, the realization claws at him that if it's not his past, the imposter has to be an anomaly modeled after his future self, though he pushes the terrifying thought aside for now, raising a hand to knock on the wooden door of the administration office. The unseen administrator greets him right away, asking what the Academy's rising star could possibly need, and as the teen steps up to the desk to answer, he intercepts another completely bizarre system exchange between his rival and the fake. Trapped in the brutal nightmare of the knife zone, T. Bowram unexpectedly breaks the tension by asking for a bar of soap. The imposter absolutely loses it in the chat, spamming laughter at the sudden concern for hygiene, while our hero seamlessly translates this pathetic cry for help into a real-world supply run, completely baffling the Academy staff by demanding a massive stockpile of toiletries. Meanwhile, a much more serious meeting takes place over a quiet cup of tea, and as the servants bow out to leave the room in strict privacy, Chief Anlon formally thanks Lady Daphne for finally ending her seclusion, which she graciously accepts, admitting it was time to step out of the shadows anyway. But when the older executive gently asks about her husband, her response is weary and resigned, prompting Anton to cut straight to the chase and confront her about the sudden divorce rumors, making her purple eyes narrow as she sharply challenges his assumptions, and when he argues that such a hasty decision is beneath her intellect, she furiously slams her hand onto the table. Daphne furiously rebukes him, shouting that he has absolutely no idea what she truly wants, but the old man remains perfectly calm and reminds her that he has supported her since childhood, even when she chose to marry a complete stranger, a reality that instantly deflates her anger. And as she quietly apologizes, knowing the choice to marry Hayden was hers alone, a brief flashback to her earnest conversation with our boy fuels her plea for Anton to understand that Hatham is different, that the kid actually understands her true feelings, begging the executive to trust him just as he once trusted her, a plea that leaves Anton to stew in irritated silence, internally annoyed that this little brat has already completely won her over. His frustration actually stems from a pro-Daphne faction meeting held just the evening before, where the executives are furious to learn they've been barred from the upcoming subjugation battle. And though Anton reveals that his own son, Platon, was among those humiliated by our boy's maneuvering, the brass quickly realizes they have zero grounds to protest since the opposing faction caught the exact same ban, forcing them to acknowledge the kid's terrifying political shrewdness, and the grim reality that if he clears this raid all by himself, the executive board will be rendered completely obsolete. Still, they bitterly admit their own track record in combat hasn't exactly been stellar, and Anton can only smirk at the sheer insidious nature of such a young child. So when a subordinate asks what their next move should be, the chief waves off the assumption that Haytham's authority comes from the commander, and declares that the real danger is simply that this boy is Luna Moon's son. Flashing back to 10 years ago, he personally investigated the snowy slums to question the old slum dweller about the grave of the supposed hero, and the old man confirmed a chilling fact. The wooden cross marking Luna Moon's tomb had just been erected, ending the memory. Back in the meeting room last evening, the executives recoil at the impossible math, wondering how, if Luna Moon died a decade ago, Haytham could possibly be 10 years old. Despite the boy's uncanny physical resemblance to the fallen medic, the terrifying realization dawns on the room that he might be a complete fake. Back in the present, Anton cuts off Daphne's fierce defense and admits with a calm smile that he doesn't actually hate the kid, especially since they all know exactly what Luna Moon looked like. He even places a hand over his heart to express genuine sympathy for the harsh life of an illegitimate orphan raised by strangers, but he points out one crucial detail to the silver-haired woman. When the medic deserted 10 years ago, she wiped all her personal records, and with a cunning gleam in his golden eyes, the chief questions if Haytham actually knows what his mother looked like, offering Daphne a dangerous suggestion to put the boy's lie to the test. While Chief Anlon plots his dangerous test, Haytham and his inner circle are currently stuck attending a formal charity party with the rest of the cadets, where Taejong marvels at the luxurious spread, calling it a massive step up from their usual outdoor barbecue. But he quickly grumbles that the stiff suits are torture and their game bodies can't even taste the virtual food anyway, prompting our hero to step up and tease him for always complaining, which makes Taejong point out that thanks to Haytham, they get to enjoy a high-class event instead of a basic dinner. Sitting down for tea, Kush Potato brings up the elephant in the room, the imposter dopamine addict, and Haytham admits he's just as confused, having absolutely no clue why some random player would go around stealing his username or why they specifically sought him out. Taejong just wants to grind until he's strong enough to fight the guy, but Kush Potato quickly shoots that down, reminding him the imposter has a digital shield that tanks bullets. Our hero points out that the blonde fanboy might actually be the one on the chopping block next, and highlights the most glaring glitch in the Matrix. The enemy is rocking a full adult body, yet the system confirms he's a player. Completely fed up, the fanboy yells at our hero, demanding to know why this nightmare run keeps throwing unknown variables at them, especially right after learning Luna Moon was a player too. Haytham quietly stews on his mother's name, before casually dropping another absolute bombshell. Daphne Goodman is a player as well. Taejong and Kush Potato practically snap their necks leaning in, completely mind-blown that the commander's elegant wife isn't just an NPC. So my guy calmly explains that both women were possessed by players who transmigrated from a completely different game. Taejong immediately asks what kind of game they were playing before getting dragged into this apocalyptic nightmare, and Haytham deadpans the absolute last answer anyone expected: a DILF dating simulation. Before anyone can process that, Kush Potato blurts out that he actually used to play it, then frantically blames his retro game otaku older sister the second the other two hit him with a synchronized stare of pure judgment. Sweating, he explains it was just a standard visual novel where you romance handsome older characters like Commander Hayden. But then he points out a massive lore overlap between that title and Safe Zone, wondering out loud if their brutal survival game was just built as an homage. The gears instantly click into place for our boy, realizing this perfectly explains the bizarre affection meter he saw on Daphne. Both games share the exact same universe. Kush Potato explains that because the dating sim was an older release, its map was strictly locked to the Cola Zone, which immediately tells Haytham that the imposter currently lurking in the Unicorn Zone couldn't have been dragged in through that game, prompting him to ask who actually developed it. The blonde fanboy reveals it was a studio called Cthulhu Games that went completely bankrupt, completely separate from Safe Zone's massive creator, and adds that barely anyone even knows the obscure company existed. Our hero falls dead silent, as the casual mention of a dev team suddenly drags up a deeply buried memory. He recalls his estranged mother starting up her own studio called The Salvation Project, right before they completely lost contact, but he coldly brushes the thought away, deciding the woman doesn't matter to him anymore anyway. Couche Potato suddenly snaps our boy out of his trance to ask why he's making such a serious face. Hatham instantly deflects by asking the blonde fanboy whose romance route he took in the dating sim, provoking a loud outburst. As he walks away from his friends, he internally resolves not to pathetically dwell on his severed ties, but his thoughts are interrupted again when Mersault approaches him in the hallway. The silver-haired man warns him that the executives are fiercely objecting to his ban from the subjugation battle and want a meeting. Hatham just smiles to himself, perfectly fine with the delay since he's too busy focusing on his immediate strategy anyway. A few days later, our boy is walking down a sunlit hallway with Commander Hayden, who casually drops the news that Hatham's time at the military academy is already over. The warlord explains he can tell just by looking at the cadets' absolute loyalty that his son has completely won them over. Hayden pauses his steps, warning the boy standing before the massive executive doors that convincing the top brass won't be nearly as easy. Unfazed, Hatham confidently assures him he can handle it, pushing his way inside to face the wolves. Our hero steps into the bright executive conference room, facing down a wall of seated hostile leadership, and immediately notes the atmosphere is way more suffocating than their first meeting. Observing that the pro-Daphne faction glares daggers at him, while the pro-Hayden side looks just as sweaty and displeased. As he strolls to his seat, he catches them whispering that the entire zone has been spiraling into chaos ever since he showed up. Chief Anlon watches the kid closely, figuring that if the boy were just out for revenge for Luna Moon, his actions would at least make sense, but his current maneuvers are a complete mystery even to his supposed allies. Taking the floor, our boy bluntly addresses the elephant in the room, his summons over the subjugation battle ban, and arrogantly declares that joining the fight alongside them would be highly inefficient. This immediately triggers Captain Joseph, who furiously objects that putting down a dying furry alligator is a joke compared to a real monster hunt requiring a massive army. Hatham remains perfectly calm, telling the seething commanders they completely missed the point, and challenges them directly to name the last time they killed a beast with their own hands, or if they even remember how to hold a gun. The green-suited officer erupts defensively, sweating bullets as he scrambles to justify their lack of field experience, insisting their administrative duties, from organizing ranks to managing supplies, are just as vital. Internally, the officers are clenching their fists in sheer frustration, wondering why the legendary Ironblood is turning a blind eye to this kid's blatant disrespect. But our boy cuts right through their pathetic excuses, casually acknowledging that larger armies do burn through more supplies, before asserting that he operates on a completely different level. He drops a massive bombshell on the room, revealing he knows the exact locations of the monster gems, the critical weak points that can drop a beast in a single strike. As a commander stammers in total disbelief, Hayden steps in to confirm that the intel has already been verified, and Hatham explains that by skipping the search phase, a small elite unit is more than enough to hunt down a massive target. Moments ago, this revelation sent a shockwave of panic through the mustached executive, who realized that if massive armies were no longer needed, they would be completely discarded. The tense silence was suddenly broken by the scrape of a chair, making Hatham turn around in surprise, as Chief Anlon stepped up to praise him, calling the boy truly remarkable and a fitting heir to the hero of the subjugation battle. The old chief then drops a bombshell on his panicked colleagues by casually announcing his immediate retirement, turning his golden eyes back to our hero to offer a little parting gift before he bows out. A massive object draped in a white cloth is wheeled into the room, and Anlon flashes a cunning smile as he asks if the young master will accept it. Chief Anlon wheels in a massive covered object, prompting Hatham to ask if it's a parting gift, but our boy plays it cool, brushing the gesture off by claiming he doesn't know much about art. The older man just flashes a cunning smile, assuring the kid he'll recognize its value immediately, and as he grabs the cloth, he internally gloats, absolutely certain that a 10-year-old couldn't possibly remember a woman who died a decade ago. Convinced that no matter how extraordinary the brat's cunning is, he won't be able to talk his way out of it this time, before demanding to know if the kid recognizes her, springing the ultimate trap. 2 days before the executive meeting, our guy visits Daphne and casually drops the news that Mersault is deploying for the subjugation battle, hoping to use the aid as bait to squeeze some dating sim lore out of her. To his shock, the white-haired woman doesn't even flinch. Hatham fully expects her to break down and beg him to stop the deployment, but instead, Daphne simply states that she supports whatever Mersault wants to do. romantically musing that if seeing the kid gave the aide the courage to fight, then she plans to formally confess her feelings the moment he returns safely, leaving the boy completely stunned. Hatham immediately deadpans, muttering that she just triggered a massive capital T death flag, which prompts Daphne to glance back and ask what he just mumbled. Our boy quickly waves the comment away and tells her not to worry. He plans to personally lead the subjugation battle from the front lines. To seal the deal, he drops a massive bombshell revealing that he inherited his mother's healing ability, and Daphne's eyes widen in absolute shock at the news. He knows his game logic recovery will be discovered eventually, so he's making the first move to control the narrative before anyone suspects he's a player. Hatham puts on a melancholic act, claiming he feels his late mother protecting him whenever he uses his power, and as he sees her sympathy hooked, our boy mentally celebrates, ready to pivot the conversation right back to the dating sim. But Daphne suddenly derails his train of thought by mentioning that Chief Anlon is preparing a gift for him, recalling how the chief suggested they create a portrait of Luna Moon for the child. While she claims the exact nature of the present is a secret, Hatham stays dead silent to absorb this critical piece of intel. The white-haired woman then softly adds that thoughts of her own mother still cross her mind from time to time, and he instantly seizes the emotional opening, asking if she could help him visit his mother's grave. The very next day, this unexpected harvest of information sends Hatham on a carriage ride through the snowy mountains, and as he sits in the cabin, he pieces together Chief Anlon's true intentions. He knows damn well it isn't a gift, it's a trap, since with so much riding on the executive meeting the old man was bound to counterattack. To figure out the chief's angle, our hero prepares a simple countermeasure, tying a gray cloth tightly around his head as a disguise. To seal the deal, he equips a new system title, the Mask of an Extra, which completely blurs his impression to others. With his eyes blacked out by the system effect, he ensures no one will recognize him, and heads out into the snowy village near the slums. There our boy offered a stack of cash to a local, asking if any strangers had visited recently. The old man revealed that a group of soldiers came by a week ago, hunting for a child named Hatham, and explained he told them he didn't know anyone by that name, before they pressed him on whether a 10-year-old with black hair and black eyes used to live there. The elder recounts, genuinely denying it, proving the system title is working perfectly, since he has no idea he's talking to that exact boy right now. But the interrogation doesn't stop there. The old man points to the nameless grave in the snow, noting the soldiers asked why it looked dug up, and explains he told them any tampering with the decade-old burial site would have been immediately noticed. The elder adds that despite the vague answers, the soldiers left looking completely satisfied. So having gathered all the intel he needed, our boy thanks the man and takes his leave. On the carriage ride back, he realizes those specific details were exactly what Chief Anlon wanted to hear. The old executive must be absolutely thrilled, because while hunting for a weakness, Anlon inadvertently found a way to deny our hero's very existence. So Hatham stares out the window, trying to figure out how to counter this. He mentally rehearses his alibis. If the chief asks about the grave's age, he'll just claim it's unverifiable, and if questioned why no one in the slums recognizes him, he'll say Luna Moon raised him in hiding. As for the disturbed burial site, he can easily throw the dead imposter, Safe Zone 8, under the bus, but as he runs through the scenarios, a fatal flaw in his cover story suddenly hits him. He has only ever seen Luna Moon as a skeleton, so he has absolutely no idea what she looked like when she was alive. That's why, the moment our boy spots the covered frame sitting in the conference room, he knows exactly what Anlon is playing at. It's a judgment seat, a trap designed to gauge his reaction to his supposed mother's face, and as the chief pulls the cloth away, the young master braces himself to fake a tearful, heartbroken performance. But the second his eyes land on the canvas, his entire mental script derails, because staring back at him is a portrait of a woman with short dark hair and glasses, leaving Hatham genuinely shaken to his core as a single unscripted word slips from his lips. Mother. Years ago, young Dam stands in a cold, dimly lit room, listening to an adult tell him he'll be perfectly fine without his mother, because, as the woman in the lab coat clinically explains, parents and children are simply programmed that way. Hatham reaches out a trembling hand, gripping the edge of the portrait's frame tight enough to splinter the wood. He stares in absolute disbelief, as the realization hits him. The legendary Luna Moon is actually his real-world mother. The top brass watch his shaking shoulders from the conference table, and Lieutenant General Max confidently declares that a reaction this visceral proves our boy is no imposter. But Lieutenant General Radu violently slams his fist onto the wood to protest, arguing that the slum dwellers didn't even recognize the kid, and this whole emotional display could just be a brilliant act. Another senior officer steps up to point out the grim reality, but Chief Anlon just sighs, admitting that if the kid is acting, they can't beat a monster like that anyway. The rest of the commanders reel in shock, but Anlon firmly confirms his official retirement. He admits his outdated combat experience can no longer keep up with this terrifying new generation, and he'd rather step down with his dignity intact than stick around as a useless figurehead. Anlon is absolutely certain that our boy's reaction to the portrait was genuine. He knows the military will soon be swallowed whole by Hatham and Result, remembering how the teen already commands the absolute loyalty of elite cadets like Platon, and how even Lady Daphne practically begs for the kid to be trusted. He figures stepping out of the way now is his safest play, but a nagging doubt still claws at the old soldier's mind. He recalls the intelligence report from the snowy village, where the locals confirm the grave has been there for over a decade, yet absolutely no one recognizes the kid. Chief Anlon wonders if the intel they gathered was somehow manipulated, because if our guy truly is a fake, then the people who blindly trust him, like Daphne and Platon, are walking straight into a slaughterhouse. Suddenly a subordinate interrupts his dark thoughts with a new lead. The slum dwellers barely knew Hatham at all, but the officer suggests they question someone who actually claims to have known the boy back then. Chief Anlon is genuinely surprised to hear that a child soldier has been loudly bragging about his tight bond with the young master. He flips open the file, scoffing at the kid's ridiculous English name, Darling Outsider. Before a sharp smirk spreads across his weathered face, the old commander orders his men to drag the boy in, determined to put our hero through one final ruthless test. Meanwhile, over at the child soldier's barracks, Couche Potato is absolutely eating up the attention of his peers. He enthusiastically hypes up his best friend Hatham by recounting every detail of their hunt out in the snowy wilderness, especially the part where our boy fearlessly stepped in front of a shaggy crocodile's tail to save his life. He boasts about how the young master took the hit for him, leaving the other recruits in absolute awe, until one of the recruits scoffs, loudly doubting that the young master would ever risk his neck for a total loser. Couche Potato fires right back with a smug grin, declaring he isn't deadweight anymore, because he's actually the squad's indispensable top-secret healer. Once, long before any of this, his past life was a completely different story, a reality where he truly was a helpless loser, born with a severe chronic illness that kept him trapped in a hospital room for most of his youth. His wealthy parents provided him with everything he could ever need, but his bitter, twisted personality only made him a target for relentless bullying. Eventually, they pulled him out of school entirely, telling him he didn't need to study or get a job and could just spend his days doing whatever he wanted. His parents always told him that. But Yeobum already knew their words were just meant to comfort a son who wasn't expected to survive, and he spent his days trapped in a hospital bed, wishing he could just walk outside in the snow and make a single friend. Instead, he became a complete shut-in. He obsessed over the psychotic strategy guides posted by a user named Dopamine Addict, until one day, feeling particularly bitter, he decided to leave a comment. He typed out an aggressive, toxic rant under the name Room Corner Honey, only to get instantly blocked. Furious, he started tracking the digital footprints of disappearing top players, and that trail eventually led him straight to the cursed convenience store. He has no complaints about his new life now, enjoying his healthy, pain-free body as he strolls through the snowy village, eager to get back to his friends. His cheerful thoughts are cut short when a stranger in a white uniform calls out to him, and abruptly orders the annoyed blonde boy to run an errand. Couche Potato narrows his eyes, wondering if that dopamine addict bastard is trying to lure him out to the slums. But across the base, our boy is caught completely off guard by a sudden report, as he learns that Darling Outsider has vanished from the barracks, making Hatham realize Chief Anlon just took a hostage.